Do you need the mayor's conference room unlocked?
Well, yeah, they're going to want to be able to go on a break back there anyway, so if you can unlock it, that's okay.
Is it one of those things, though, that you have to have it for a record just in case?
Well, not really, because they record the meeting. But it doesn't matter because at some point
Oh, so they're recorded
recording.
separately?
I do because
Okay.
I don't like doing the minutes on this system.
Okay.
It's such a...
So how do you?
Yeah, they're double layer because these are pretty risque. I wear them without tights under them when I'm feeling like it, but today was not a warm enough day for that.
Risque enough day, but not a warm enough day.
That's right. It's always risque enough.
Yeah, it's
for
always
me.
risque enough.
I'm not shy. I got to take
Damn. I'll tell Jerry. People too shy.
Oh yeah, I know. It's 30 years of knowing you.
Yeah, he's like,
God, that woman, you can never get her to talk.
yeah, never. Unsolicited. He makes those for me all the time. I talked to Tony and asked her how we can do the stuff, the rest of these did it first because it take like 45 minutes, maybe.
Instead of the two,
Yeah. And she said, well, she was talking about it. She said, well, you know how you work yourself? And I said, well, there's going to be plenty of people there that can hear anything. They're like business, and just get them out. And I said, the ordinance is housekeeping, for God's sakes.
Oh yeah, I hope that takes no time.
It shouldn't, because I'm going to tell them we didn't do, I even talked to fiscal planning at length and Tom, and we said, look, we're keeping it, we're just back to code. I can't help it that 2109, the Girdwood Code is all over the map, so you can't do anything convenient, like say this
Yeah, I know.
block goes
And now they're going to do it in Indian. Really, it's like Girdwood, what, 30 zoning district? No!
Well, I was going through it with Mary, and we were searching for something in the code, so I was just doing global on the folio of these things. It's easier to do a global on there to look for stuff. And I was like, we clicked on the 2140, and I was like, gee, Mary, you got it. 72.
Yeah.
My new one is, my new zoning district for SLs is R2WTF.
That's probably already an existing zone.
They don't ask for anything,
Like
ever. They ask him to do.
Don't ask. Follow my lead here. Whoa, that was really loud. Sheesh. Woohoo. Hey.
Okay. Well, sound is coming through now.
I blow his eardrum out. Bam. Sorry. So, let's see. Let me set Tony. And here we are. Cracking up.
30 seconds away, but... Oh, from this, so it gets encoded and it goes to Granicus and then it comes back over the web, yeah.
Everything should be set up, if you say that.
Okay.
What's the problem is I keep recording this now because then it has like...
Well, I don't think we need to start the meeting.
All right. You need anything else to signal? Chris is going to Yeah. I'm going to do the baby swap, and then just bring so that will process it. Yeah, put it up here. And a little bit suspect. You got a different partner than your partner. Who is so funny? So I'm here just setting up, and then I'll do like the swap over with my husband to fill all that. So he will not be here. Okay. Yeah, for the presentation part. I'm not just, yeah. We'll see. We'll see. I'll have to be like,
I can remember when I was president. Install, and every time we move that, so you were very thoughtful. You should have just
so yeah, I'll just yeah, we're not until
later.
yeah. So I'll just you need to plug into the system. You need to plug into the system.
I'm not plugging. I'm just going to
this.
just put it on the laptop.
Okay, perfect.
You look like somebody who's back there on.
I will call the February 25, 2009 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Would the secretary call the roll, please?
Eischen.
Here.
Phelps.
Here.
Yoshimura. Here. Frederick.
Here.
Littleton.
Here.
Key.
Here.
Wang. Jones.
Here.
Earnhardt.
We have a quorum. Okay,
Madam Chair.
Mr. Wang sent an email late in the day saying he would not be able to attend. Yes, the next item, but before we do the agenda changes, let's take care of the minutes and,
Madam Chair,
yes.
move for approval of the Planning and Zoning Commission minutes for Monday, January 5th, January 12th, January 26th, and February 2nd.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Could you punch in? I want to see if this is working tonight. There, okay. Yes. Well, I can see people's names. Are there any corrections or changes? Ms. Pease?
Yes, Madam Chair. On the minutes of January 5th, I had 2 minor changes.
Okay.
And those are on page, really, I think they're just typos, 27, under Commissioner Weddleton, second paragraph. He asked if there could be a trail, misspelling, trial. And on page 28, in Commissioner Phelps' motion, 5th line up from the bottom, I believe that new condition 14 should state placing a note on the plat, the word plat is missing, stating that there is a stream protection setback. And Madam Chair, I don't have any video input to my screen tonight.
No video input. So is our technical person here? All right. So assistance is on its way, Ms. Pease.
Thank you.
Is there any, did you have corrections to any of the other minutes, anyone?
I have a short one on January 5th.
All right.
And just page 5, and this is the third paragraph from the bottom. It says, Commissioner Phelps did not recall discussion of the hours of operation. I think it did recall discussion of the hours of operation. Otherwise,
What do you recall, Mr. Phelps?
Otherwise, it's like a double negative.
Your microphone isn't on. Okay. All right.
Whatever he recommends.
The secretary says Mr. Weddleton is correct, so it would be did recall. Any further corrections? Hearing none, are there any objections to the approval of the minutes?
There we go.
Hearing none, those minutes are approved as corrected. Moving on to item C, special orders of business. The first item of disclosure is disclosures, and we're going to have a second item under special orders of business. We're going to be moving up our appearance request from H. 1, Diane Holmes, and that's going to become item 2 under special orders of business. So if you folks want to write that in on your agenda. And Mr. Isham, would you please handle disclosures?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Pease, do you have anything to disclose this evening?
Yes, I do. Relevant to the site-specific land use plan for Chugach Eagle River. In 2007, I was working part-time for Agnebeck, who prepared this plan. I was finishing up another project, and they knew this project was coming along, so they asked me to put together some phone lists and make some calls to agencies. They hadn't officially gotten the project yet, so I didn't get any information in any detail at all, nor make any personal connections, nor contacts. But should that be a concern to the Commission, I wanted to be sure that was on the record.
I think that's just a disclosure that will be on the record. I do not believe that would impact your decision. I mean, all you know is you may know some people to call.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Frederick.
Nothing.
Okay, Ms. Yoshimura? No. Ms. Jones?
Yes, I have one. No, actually, I have two. The Commission is going to need to take action with regard to G2. As you know, the law firm I work for represents AWWU and has a contract with the municipality. So I customarily abstain from all actions dealing with that, and so I had asked the Commission to take action in regard to that case. The second disclosure is with regard to case 2009-117, South Central Foundation. The law firm that I work for has represented South Central to do with certain business items, nothing to do with land use that I can tell. And the only involvement that I've ever had, to the best of my knowledge, is one time looking up the definition of a word in a federal statute, or the definition of a word in a federal statute. In the past, I've been directed to participate in matters involving South Central. I am an hourly employee of the firm. I don't have any interest in the firm other than that. I don't get bonuses. I just get a paycheck every 2 weeks. But I'm making that disclosure on both those cases, so it's at the will of the Commission.
Yeah. Ms. Jones, in regards to 2009-017, I think we've dealt with you on the South Central before, and you have participated.
Correct.
I don't think that that's a requirement that we
Well, I thought it was
we
important
do-
for me to make the
we do need to-
disclosure.
Just to have that on the record, and it, historically, you have participated even though your firm does have a...
Right, and I do know there was at least one instance where some attorney asked me to check the definition of a word in a federal statute. But I don't know I don't know any more than that, except I was checking the definition of a word.
Okay, well, on that particular one, I think that I will direct you to participate on that. We won't take a vote for that thing. Now, in regards to the AWWU item, I would like to hear a positive motion to direct Ms. Jones to participate in that, and then, in fact, we'll vote on that.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, good. I got a...
And Mr. Frederick seconded.
Mr. Frederick seconded. Thank you. Okay, in this, I'll just speak to this one. I think that, historically, in this particular case, Ms. Jones has not participated because she does probably have a legitimate conflict on this, and for sake of appearances and so forth, it would be best if she didn't participate. So in this particular case, I'm not going to support requiring her to participate. I will be voting no. Is there any other comments from any members of the commission? Okay, go ahead and use your machines. A no vote prevents her from participating. A yes vote requires her to participate.
Having a little problem with the machine here. Well, it works.
Hasn't shown up on my machine. Has he voted? Oh, there it is.
Okay, Ms. Jones, you are excused from participating.
Okay.
So, let's continue. Any other disclosures? Is that it?
That side of the table?
No, for you.
Oh, I'm done.
You're done, okay. Mr. Phelps?
No.
And Mr. Weddleton?
None.
And I have none.
Okay. Then the next item on our agenda would be C2, appearance request by Ms. Holmes. And do you have some handouts? Okay. If you want to bring those forward, we won't start the clock until you get those passed out. Okay. Thanks, Ms. Thanks.
Shall I turn on upper? Okay, good. Ready? Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm here because over the 10 years that I've been part of the 2020 process, that had a great deal of involvement and visioning for our city, I feel we're deviating from our goals. Why? Because mistakes from an overworked staff, lack of education for the commissions, deliberate oversight by some administration and staff, and developers lobbying. This and a compounding of errors on a case that came before you last fall was the final straw. We've got to do things better than outside for ourselves because folks aren't moving here for the weather. Our valued trail system often doesn't translate at the ballot box. So when we have the opportunity, actually the requirement, to require trail and pedestrian easements to fulfill certain 2020 policies, don't blink. And don't feel sorry for the developer who may be crying that easements are a taking. Why not? Just analyze the real estate ads, which I did. Every time a parcel has anything green near it, it becomes a prominent selling point. And by the way, such properties are sold for 20% more than non-green ones. Statistics for this have been laid out in an excellent report by the city's own watershed management manager. Your staff recommendations don't always serve you well. They've missed things, missed existing adjacent easements and required policies. Our parks plan calls for securing missing greenbelt parcels and private-public partnerships. Yet last fall, you were told the city couldn't accept such land, even with a willing developer there. There's also a condition placed on that plat against having a trail within the wide, steep greenbelt setback, stream setback, because of erosion. Although attributed to watershed management, that condition was never part of their original request. At a subsequent planning board hearing, there was a weak condition for a trail easement, but that packet lacked the statement from the trails coordinator for an easement perpendicular to the stream, but citizens asked for it. The developer was willing, but his statement on the steepness of that locale killed the deal, and this is what brings me to my point in your photos. Never assume that a steep trail, a steep slope can't accommodate an access sustainably. You want trail designers? There isn't one on the city's payroll, and consultants are not either. Please follow the 2020 policy, because that's the only thing we have to make sure that our city gets developed the way we envisioned it 10 years ago. And I thank you for moving the agenda.
Thank you very much for coming out tonight, Ms. Holmes, with your valuable comments.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I have a question.
Okay.
Ms. Holmes, where were these photos taken that you handed out here?
And Rabbit Creek Greenbelt.
Yes, Ms. Pease?
Ms. Holmes, the steps here, I guess some people would look at that and say, well, it's not ADA accessible or the grade is steeper than ADA allows, but I take it that on certain kinds of terrain and trails, these outdoor steps are permissible, and that's one question. And the second follow-up question would be, what would be do you have any idea what the grades are here that the steps go up and down?
Yes, and I should have added that. Yes, there are trails within the municipality that don't have to be ADA, and of course these are unpaved wilderness-type trails. The grade here is 66% on the Nice Creek one, done by an Eagle Scout project, and the lower one is about 44.
Okay. Any further questions for Ms. Holmes?
Yeah. Is that degrees or percent? Because if it's a 44% slope, that's pretty, that's like
well, you can tell it's very steep. And the trail designer who went and measured them for me, and I'm sorry I didn't print this out, I'd be glad to email it to you. He told me what that was, and I think they go by degrees, don't they? I have that email, Mr. Ocean. I'd be happy to clarify for that for you.
Anyone else have further questions? Mr. Weddleton? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Yoshimura. I will. I didn't see you. Yes, go ahead, Ms. Yoshimura.
Ms. Holmes, thank you for your testimony. May I ask thank you for your testimony. May I ask you who maintains these trails?
Well, for one thing, these entrances that you see are designed to require exceedingly little maintenance for a number of reasons, and I'd be glad to take you on a tour if you'd like in the spring. The trails themselves are wilderness, and they do require brushing now because of growth, and that's done by volunteer groups.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Weddleton?
Not exactly a question. I guess I'm familiar with this trail. It's steep and it's a wonderful trail, and it takes very little maintenance to keep it up. But I think the issue of trail easement doesn't necessarily require that a trail be built in that easement. There's a couple in my neighborhood that are trail easements, but there's no official maintenance at all. People just use them, and they're perfectly adequate for the amount of use that they get, and they get a lot of use. So just having an easement for a trail is often 80% of what you need for a proper connection between neighborhoods.
So who owns the trail? I mean, on whose land is the trail located?
It's municipal parkland.
It's municipal parkland? Okay.
Okay. Any further questions from commissioners? Ms. Pease?
Yes, one more question. Ms. Holmes, you mentioned that sometimes developers claim there's a taking involved, but they shouldn't because of the property value enhancement. And I think that property value enhancement's pretty well documented, but the issue of taking is different. And I think you were alluding to the fact that there are policies which require trails, and therefore it's not a taking. But I wondered if you wanted to just remind us which those policies are, so that...
Yes, 55 definitely. For every plat and replat, the platting board maybe, but sometimes when you see plats, you should be requiring a trail connection. And in the case before you in the fall, you were not made aware that there was an upstream trail easement that had been there for probably tens of years. And that should have been made aware, and also you should have been required to, connect to that. And eventually the platting board voted to do that when they were made aware of it, when it came before them. You also have policy 13, and you have a couple other policies that generally are geared to making these connections that are throughout so many of our adopted plans, from the LRTP to the Parks Plan and throughout 2020. They all combine to say, give us some access, give us some connectivity.
Thank you. Okay. Anything further? Thank you for coming out tonight. Okay. Now we are at the consent agenda.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I move for approval of the consent agenda. Consent agenda items 1, A, B, C, D, and E.
Second.
Okay, I need someone to pull 1A on my behalf.
Madam Chair, I request to pull 1A and also 1B.
Let's see what Okay, does anyone else wish to pull anything?
I'd like to pull 1E.
1E. Okay. Okay, anything else? We only have 2 more left. Okay. And you had made the motion, Mr. Isham?
Yes.
And to approve, and Ms. Pease had seconded it?
That's correct.
Okay, is there any objection to approving items C and D? Hearing none, those are approved. All right, Ms. Pease, item D, 1A.
Madam Chair, in our, I don't know if there was an email sent around this because I didn't use my email this afternoon, but there's a yellow revision copy in our packet that's on the table tonight. And in case anybody hasn't seen it, the most important change was to special limitation on page 4, 2A. The draft given to us, it's...
Madam Chair, point of order. You asked for A. This is B.
I'm sorry?
Okay. Madam Chair, did you want A pulled simply because you...
Just because I have a conflict. And
that's right. You have a conflict on that one. So then I move...
Just a motion is all we need.
I move for approval of D1A with Ms. Jones abstaining.
Second.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, will the secretary note my abstention? All right, now you can try D1B, Ms. Pease.
Yes, Madam Chair, I apologize for getting ahead of the schedule.
You're just hurrying along tonight.
On page 4, 2A in our packet had referred to the height limits placed on buildings, but of course that was on a concept plan which may or may not ever come back before the commission. The original special limitation, which is what I had made a motion on, was that the height should apply to the western half of the site and the eastern half of the site. So not the buildings in the concept plan, but the half of the site. So that's been corrected. And then a sentence on building heights and internal parking was moved up to the correct, to 2A. It had been under 2B before. And then punctuation was made consistent in 2C. Also asked for some clarifications on 13, just because the grammar was confusing. There's one more correction that I think is warranted, and that is on the front page, A1. This is a finding of fact, and the finding of fact is still worded that the special limitation will limit the height of 5 western buildings and eastern, or the remainder of the buildings. And the special limitation, the original one that we approved, is to limit the height on half the site and the other half of the site, on both halves of the site. So I would like the wording here to be made consistent so that it would say, rezone from 1A to R4SL, the special limitation will limit residential density to 16.5 DUA, a maximum of 220 units, with a height limitation of 55 feet for the western, and then insert the words, part of the site, currently proposed for 5 residential buildings, comma, with the structures on the eastern part of the site not to exceed 41 feet in height.
Is there any objection to that change?
Just as long as it's in the minutes. I mean, again, we can't go making stuff up
Well,
here.
we have, yes.
Through the chair, just to clarify where that wording came from on A1, and I'd spoken with Commissioner Pease this morning, and I didn't change this one. This, of course, if we would have discussed it earlier, had A1, either of us thought of A1 earlier. But that was the petitioner's request. Their actual request was that it's kind of standard on a resolution prior to the findings of fact. That's why it doesn't say the commission finds in front of it. It's sort of explaining what the request was. The commission clarified it under the SLs on the floor at the hearing to clarify the SL wording, that because it didn't make sense to refer to the concept plan, as Ms. P said, it made more sense to refer to half of the site. So their original request was regarding the buildings. But I can either that would be a finding to make it, otherwise I can just say the petitioner's request was for.
We need to put that under findings needs to reflect our findings of the action we took at the hearing.
Right, and there was no specific finding wording on that is the problem after the motion was made in the minutes. But the exact motion is under item 5 under page 205, and that was cut exactly from the minutes. On page 2, item 5, so that was the exact wording. The condition itself, I mean, the special limitation was just a typo, and that's why when Ms. Pease went back and looked at the staff report, that SL was incorrect in my original draft resolution. So she was correct when we went and looked back at it. But the problem was there was no specific finding wording in the minutes regarding it. So it might be best to cut A1 altogether, since A1 was never actually stated during the findings in the minutes that I could find.
That would be all right with me.
Because it came from the staff report, so maybe it's best, I know it came from the staff report discussion.
Okay.
Because maybe it would be best to cut A1, because then we're clear with the record, we're clear with the SLs.
That would be all right with me. I just don't want it to be inconsistent that we found a height limit for the buildings when we didn't specifically discuss it, and the special limitation places a height limit on half the site, each half of the site.
Okay, so then you want to move to eliminate, approve it. Approve it with her change?
You can make a motion to approve it with the
Approve it with deleting A1. Oh, she can just make her motion that way. Okay.
Madam Chair, I move to approve resolution number 2009-003, the yellow copy before us, with the deletion of finding of fact A1 and renumber the subsequent findings.
I second it.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, that is approved as changed. Okay. We have one more, Mr. Weddleton, D1E.
I actually didn't have big trouble with the way this ended up, but there were some points made by Commissioner Earnhardt and myself to distinguish the decision here from the one we made earlier that evening. And those points that we made don't show up here in the findings. And maybe they're not really relevant. Should they be here?
Jeff, you made them in the findings. They should be in here.
If they were in the findings, if they were made before the motion was made and not part of the findings, then they won't be here.
Okay, I had made points to make a distinction. One regarded that the existing zoning in this case of R5 was not high density, whereas the R3 in the prior case was appropriate for a town center. Then I made the point that this is a retail operation as opposed to an auto-oriented operation, and also that there was no nearby B3 alternative for the store. And Commissioner Earnhardt had a couple other points that I don't recall exactly what they were. I didn't go through the minutes. Did we get the minutes on this?
And let's see.
We
We
did?
should
Okay.
have. We should have. Let's see what the hearing date was here.
Madam Chair, it's on page 22 of our February 2nd minutes. And Mr. Weddleton's correct that he did make a direct finding that this differed from the previous case, and he gave his reasons why. And so did Commissioner Earnhardt. He's right.
So maybe this needs to go back to be enhanced.
Through the chair, if you postpone it to 3/2, we should be able to next Monday. We should be able to fix it in the morning and send it back to you, and we'll double check those, get everything in there for you.
Okay.
It's a question on that. In these resolutions, is it so we're referring to a decision made prior in the meeting, which I think we don't want to set a precedence on. And that is appropriate for findings on this specific case, though?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So I'd move to postpone this for corrections. Is that what I do?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And Ms. Pease, you're in the queue. Oh, Art, you seconded. Is there any objection to the postponement? Hearing none, that's postponed. I would suggest everyone save your minutes from February 2nd, so when it comes back, if you need to refer to them, you will have them handy. Okay. Clear that out, and moving on, we're done with the consent agenda. Now we need to do some agenda changes, and I'm going to let Mr. Isham take the lead on this.
Madam Chair, we've got some fairly quick things that we're going to be dealing with this evening, and it appears, in my opinion, that the one thing that will take some time is G1, so I would like to basically put that at the end of the other public hearing items. So move case 2008-139 to the very end of the public hearing portion of this.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Weddleton is in the machine, so he gets recognized. Is there any objection? Okay, since we have, a little person here with the presenter for 2008-139, hopefully these others will go quickly. Okay, and anything else you wanted to change, Mr. Isham?
That's all.
That's all. Okay. Then the next item on the agenda would be the AWWU case. So I'm going to step out, and you can step in. You can just be me.
Do we need to deal with these postponement requests? The postponement requests?
Yes, on the agenda. Yes. We have 2 postponements that we, thank you, Mr. Frederick. I was just too eager to get out of here.
Shouldn't take long.
No. Case number G4. We need a motion. This is case number 2009-018, Redoubt Development, LLC, has requested a postponement until next Monday, March 2nd, 2009. We need a motion to postpone.
Madam Chair, move to postpone case 2009-018 to March 2nd.
Okay, and Ms. P. seconded that. Is there any objection? Hearing no objection, that is postponed. The next case that is being postponed is case number G6, 2009-028. The petitioner's the municipality of Anchorage. This is a plan amendment for the University Medical District, and a postponement has been requested until March 9th, 2009. Mr. Frederick is in the queue, and Mr. Isham has seconded. Is there any objection? Hearing no objection, that matter is postponed until March 9th. And so I will now take my leave and turn the chair over to Mr. Isham. He's called me down.
Okay, we're moving on to G2, case 2009-016, Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility, zoning conditional use for a water reservoir. Can we hear from the staff, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Case 2009-016. The petitioner is seeking an amendment to a final conditional use approval for utility substation. The request specifically is to add a 1 million gallon water reservoir tank to a site that is currently developed with a 500,000 gallon water reservoir tank. Petition site is zoned R7. In 2005, they received approval for the existing tank as well as concept approval for a 2 million gallon replacement reservoir tank. Site selections were done at that time. Site selection and analysis has since been done, and the need was actually reduced on this site, and so they are back to finalize that concept approval before you tonight. The department recommends approval of this request subject to conditions 1 through 5 on page 16 of the packet. And if you note on page 9 of the packet, Urban Design Commission has already approved the public facility landscape review. Thank you.
Okay, is there any questions for staff? Ms. Pease?
Yes, first, just clarification on page 1, bottom of the page. Says zoning is R3SL and R7, but it's just R7 according to the map.
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay.
Any further questions for staff?
One quick thing.
Okay, Mr. Weldon.
There was a recommendation, this is page 56 of the packet, so I think it's from the earlier work. And one of the conditions with this sight line from Potter's Marsh of the water reservoir tank.
Correct.
And that's not in the current recommendations. Would it be a problem to add that to the?
Through the chair, no. That has been done. If you look on page 37 of the packet, those 36 and 37, those visual analyses that were submitted with this, this is not a change in height from what's existing there. It's adding to it right below it, but it's no change in those visual impacts, and they've provided that site analysis.
So those pictures would guarantee that you wouldn't see it from Potter's Marsh?
Through the chair, the petitioner's representative can speak to that. You could probably, if you looked close enough, it's not readily visible when you're looking around. I think if you were looking for it, that would probably be there. I have the color pictures in the packet, and I would leave that to the petitioner's representative to clarify further.
Any further questions for staff? Yeah, Ms. Pease.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. On page, with regard to page 8 discusses under pedestrian and vehicular traffic circulation and safety, it discusses the trails plan, but it didn't mention vehicular traffic circulation. And I looked at the Hillside District Plan because I know that connectivity is not complete in these areas. There's still some subdivisions. I guess there's one that's been platted but might have gone back to the bank. So I'm not sure the connectivity is fully spelled out. The Hillside District Plan is in draft form, and I looked on page 4-6 of that document, and I realized that staff and the audience don't have it in front of them. But it does show several proposed connections that go in this vicinity, and I just wondered whether staff had looked at where those connections are to ensure that there isn't an obstruction or impediment, partly because it looks as if this is on a section line, and section lines are sometimes used for connectivity. So could you address the question of whether this facility retains the opportunities, legal opportunities and practical opportunities for road connections?
Through the chair, Ms. Pease, for road connections are not planned to and aren't going to go through this site. Public access to this site is something that the water utility, whether or not this additional reservoir is added to the site, does not want because of safety reasons and protection of the reservoir itself. There are other opportunities to the south. The subdivision to the south is currently under construction. There's subdivision agreement work going on with it, and that is currently occurring. I brought up the connectivity need as well with the plating officer. This site has never been discussed and is not planned on being discussed as being needed for any future access there. The only potential concern that I could come up or that I discussed with anybody was able to discuss was the trail, which will, if you note on page 3, you can see where it kind of comes down from the north right above it, but it's going off-site. It does not exist on this site. So since this site has been originally chosen through the site selection process for a water reservoir site in 2005 for the original reservoir, this has been off the table for road connection.
If I could just exhaust that subject. You mentioned connections to the south, and I can see that on page 13 of our packet that Johns Point Drive continues to the south. The other question I had was those large parcels to the east.
Correct.
Is there connectivity possible through, looks as if there's a, Providence Point Drive comes to the edge of that parcel to the east.
Correct.
So am I correct in assuming that
Correct.
that's where the parcel to the east will connect?
Through the chair, yes, it'll have to go through Providence Point and then over to the east and to the north, possibly to the south, but not through this area. Also with the Helena Point Circle being there, there's no potential for connectivity right in there, that and the topographic change, so it would have to go through Providence Point.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for staff? Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing here shortly, and I assume there's somebody from AWWU to testify. Okay. What I want to do is read the rules before we start. First of all, people who wish to testify must follow time limits established by our Commission's Rules of Procedure. And a petitioner will have 10 minutes, and part of that time may be reserved for rebuttal. Representatives of groups such as community councils, PTAs, and so forth have 5 minutes, and then individuals have 3 minutes. When your testimony is complete, you may be asked questions by the Commission. You may only testify once on any issue unless questioned by the Commission. An individual may have appeal rights relating to any action that the Planning and Zoning Commission takes. Appeals must be filed with the clerk's office within 20 days after the Planning and Zoning Commission's final decision. Finally, an individual may request written findings from any Commission decision within 7 days. So the public hearing is open, and we will hear from the petitioner. Sir, you have 10 minutes. Would you like to reserve any time for rebuttal?
I'd like to reserve 2 minutes.
Fine, 2 minutes. Very good.
My name is Jeff Coleman. I'm the Assistant Project Manager for AWWU. My name is Jeff Coleman. I'm the Assistant Project Manager for AWWU on this project. I'm accompanied by Elise Huggins, who is the landscape architect, and also Donna Lee, who is a civil engineer on this project. We really have no specific comments. We're here available to answer questions, and I guess the only comment that I would make is that we are in support of the conditions recommended by the planning staff and the conditions that were outlined by the UDC. So that's really all I have at this point.
Okay, you've got 7.5 plus 2, so that's 9 minutes for rebuttal. Are there any questions from members of the Commission? Yes, Ms. Peace.
Yes, Mr. Coleman, I just wanted to be able to make sure that we can make a positive finding on the policy that the comp plan policy that this will be efficient and cost effective. And I didn't fully get that satisfaction from the staff write-up, since this meets the immediate needs, but another site will have to be searched out and constructed, I gather, for the long-term needs of $2 million. So can you sort of give us the words that explain why this is efficient and cost-effective to have 2 sites, one for now, very near term, and then continue the search for another one?
I think one of the major items is that the level of development in the area, and I might rely on Donna to help me here a little bit. The 1 million gallon is the immediate need right now, and we did identify through the site selection process 2 sites, and both which had advantages and disadvantages. And I'll let you know.
Hi, my name is Donna. I'm a project civil engineer. And as regarding the 2 sites versus just 1 site, initially it was planned to develop the lower site, which would be at Legacy Point, for 2 million gallons. But due to development changes and lack of demand immediately in that area, the project was reduced to a more immediate demand near term for the 1 million gallons at Sam's, which, Anchorage Water is what already owned that site. So that was initially already planned to develop for a larger reservoir anyway, back when it was developed. So, but rather than worry about completing the project for 2 million gallons, the 1 million would satisfy the immediate need for the short term, and the other would be reserved for future development and be based on upgrades for Golden View and be developer dependent for future area development at Legacy Point.
Yes, if I may. So I understand this sort of build according to the need, and demand hasn't materialized at the other site. But what about the efficiency of building and operating two sites?
Well, I don't think they, in the near term, anticipated having to break this up. But as far as efficiency for the same infrastructure that's already in place will allow for filling the additional reservoir and not require upgrade, and the site is already available. So it doesn't require any major infrastructure upgrade to accommodate the 1 million.
Okay, but over the long term, then you have two sites. You may have two sites. You have to maintain.
Not necessarily. It could also be accommodated for additional requirements for supply by replacing the 500,000 that's present there with another 1 million gallon and incrementally increase the supply there rather than do Legacy if that does not materialize as a need, an adequate need.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Mr. Weddleton.
Well, actually, a little more on that.
Yeah.
How much water could you store on this site?
A
1
total,
tank or two?
in the future, if the 1/2 million gallon reservoir tank that's there now is replaced with a 1 million, the whole site could contain 2 million gallons.
But you couldn't build big enough to do 3 on that?
The new reservoir would not accommodate size-wise a 3 million, and then because the old one has to be replaced eventually anyway, so the 500,000.
Could it be replaced with a 2 million gallon tank?
It would be tight, but it could be done.
What was the public response to a tank at Legacy Point?
They preferred the tank. Of all the choices for the sites that were presented to the public, it was narrowed down from 15 down to 4, and in the four sites, Legacy was the preferred location because it was kind of out of the residential area near the school, which was potentially going to be there, and then the senior development was going to go there. But due to that demand, they figured it would be better if it was closer to that development rather than in the residential area above on the east side of Golden View. But because the Anchorage Water Wastewater already owned the site up at the top of Prominence Point, that kind of by default became the site because of the lack of demand when the development was canceled in the Legacy Point area.
So is it twice as much cost to build a 2 million gallon tank as it is to make a 1?
No. It's incrementally larger cost, but not necessarily double the cost.
Okay. I know I was involved a little bit in early discussions on these water tanks.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that seemed to be overlooked continuously was the need for water in case of wildfire. And I understand that's not WWU's mission to provide fire hydrants, but in fact you have in parts of the hillside, and this area would be very vulnerable in case of wildfire, and it seems like this would be a good time to start preparing for that, but you would need more water.
Well, if Golden View is developed and a developer put in a line to develop the lower area at Legacy Point and a reservoir was placed there, the Anchorage Water Wastewater discussed allowing fire hydrants along Golden View. But aside from that, any storage capacity allowed for fire flow would be not available necessarily through fire hydrants, but through trucks hauling water from the reservoir.
Okay, thanks.
For areas not along Golden View.
Any further questions for the petitioner? Okay, Ms. Pease.
I just wanted to make sure I understand this so I can state the finding correctly. It would appear from your presentation that this is efficient or cost-effective in one of two ways. If a demand develops at the south end of Golden View, that lower elevation site would require lower pumping costs?
Would require what?
Lower pumping costs?
No, not necessarily.
Okay, why would that be a good deal then?
Why would Legacy be a good deal?
Yeah.
Well, okay, Legacy would require pumping costs because it would have to pump, because it's at the lowest elevation of the available sites, and it would need to pump to adjacent pressure zones, which are as high, one place higher than the location of the reservoir, which would be back up north along Golden View. It's pressure zone 760 and or 8. I can't remember, but the reservoir would be inadequate in providing gravity flow to areas adjacent to Golden View, where it's basically the same elevation. So it would require back pumping to areas that are kind of not adequately low enough to gravity feed.
Okay.
And the booster station would have to pump to Legacy to provide the adequate pressure for the fire hydrants that's located along Golden View. So Sam's gravity flow-wise was the better option because it has the same fill line as the existing reservoir anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for the petitioner? Okay, thank you. You still have about 9 minutes for rebuttal when the time comes. Okay, the public hearing is now open. Is there anybody who would like to testify in this case? Is there anybody that would like to testify in this case? One more time, is there anybody that would like to testify? Okay, fine. Petitioner, you can come back up. You've got 9 minutes to speak to us again if you'd like.
I think we have no further comments.
Any final questions for the petitioner?
Actually, maybe I can make one point. I was involved early on this, and this was actually very contentious on the hillside where to put these water tanks. And early on, the water utility came, and the sense of the people in the area was that they had made their decisions, and they came and presented, here's where they're going to go. And there was a lot of howling, and the water utility backed off and started a much more involved public process. And I think the fact that there's no one here to comment on this really says a lot. And so I was really impressed with the willingness to go back to square one and start over again. So anyway, thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Fine, thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Okay, the public hearing is closed. The matter rests with the commission. I accept a positive motion. Ms. Pease?
Yes, Mr. Vice Chairman, in the case of 2009-016, I move for approval of the reservoir expansion as it has been outlined in our staff packet with the staff's conditions of approval on page 10 of our packet with no changes.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. Weddleton seconded. Fine. Ms. Pease, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, the packet outlines the fact that there is a need for additional water storage capacity. AWW has documented that. And this site, by the testimony of Commissioner Weddleton, there had been a lot of contention and review by the community, and this site received no public opposition tonight. I think I'd like to also add to the findings that this site meets numerous comprehensive plan policies, namely 42, 44, 75, 76, and 80, as explained in our staff's findings. And I also wanted to add that the comprehensive plan goals for utilities include an integrated, efficient, and cost-effective network of utilities. And as the petitioner explained to us, although this site will be built to meet the immediate capacity with a 1 million gallon water tank, this site can be upgraded with a larger reservoir tank if demand materializes, and this site may in fact be better than the other site considered at the south end of Golden View, because the elevation is higher here, so that it has the less pumping required because it's uphill of the area it would serve, and it has the same fill lines as the existing reservoir, so that allows for efficient operation. So I will be supporting this motion.
Any further comments from the commissioners? Is there any objection? Unanimously approved. We're going to take about a 5-minute stand down here while I go back and get a hold of Ms. Jones.
I'm good. Have a chance to tell the commission what we were told by Tommy also in our work session, that we need to restate any findings, however long-winded it may be, after the motion is made, that we can't rely on staff to go back and make a nice set of findings from the staff packet or the discussion, although Angela's did that in one of the resolutions before it. She crafted it, but if we have to be detailed and good into it.
Spent the whole day at home. I had something else. Make the tapes out. Hot box. And I got out of the house. See what the rough is. Yeah. Watch. That's not a day's worth of talent.
I thought of pink roses in my jacket from the side of the speech yesterday. I know, this time-honored tradition. Yeah, well, actually, hung my jacket and my vest and my hat in alder bushes because there are coyotes up there by Hooktop. I wanted to do some animals. And actually, it was just finishing the interval, and I came to an road from Rattler, and I spoke to somebody who stopped there, an Asian woman, indeterminate age, 35 or 45. Because I said, I have to make marks to mark my intervals because they get so brain dead or something like that. So it was clear that I was right there, done, it's my step. Did my next interval, and my vest was gone. So I had to taken it. What else could happen? So I intercepted her. And I said, did you take my vest? No, she zipped it into her fanny pack. And she left my hat, because that's old and outdated. Isn't that appalling? It was so obvious.
It's a good lesson, right?
Stuff there all the time. Yeah. Well, I never leave my keys or cell phone or anything in my pockets. But still, so I guess I have to take the chance with a coyote.
Do a better interval with all the stuff. Hard.
Yeah, but anything is still
Yeah, that's sad to hear.
All right, we're back on the record. The next case before us is 2009-017. The petitioner is South Central Foundation, and the request is for a determination from the Planning and Zoning Commission on adequate lot size for a hospital. Could we have the staff presentation, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. South Central Foundation is requesting a waiver from AMC 2145-380C1. That section of the code sets forth the minimum lot size for a hospital or psychiatric institution, but it provides a caveat that says unless authorized by the Planning and Zoning Commission to allow a lesser minimum lot size. In this case, they're requesting a minimum lot size of 1.77 acres when 2.5 acres would otherwise be required for a 44-bed hospital. Because the proposed hospital is within an existing medical campus, it does share existing access to green space, water, and a natural setting, which plays a critical role in the healing process. There is convenient access and passage between other campus buildings and services. The petitioner also owns an adjacent lot as well that is constructed currently. Combined, the two lots equal approximately 2.8 acres, which is over that 2.5-acre size. However, it is constructed with a separate building on it. So within this setting, it meets the full intent of that requirement. But also the use itself, more importantly, has been shown to be able to be sited appropriately on the lot as it is currently platted with that lower lot size. Staff has not been able to determine where the lot size ratio of beds to land limitation originated from. We've combed through the files, through the minutes previously throughout the years. And this required lot size does not seem to be rational when the development of a 44-bed hospital can meet all the other pertinent requirements such as lot coverage, setbacks, height, landscaping, and parking, all the characteristics of use that would go along with a hospital as well. And it does not seem to fit well with the other allowed uses in the district. And the department does find that the code, in fact, should be amended to remove this provision. And the department thus supports this waiver from AMC 2145-380C1 to allow this lesser minimum lot size of 1.77 acres for the proposed use. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Isham.
Yes, I'm just curious, are we going to do something in the new Title 21 to sort of fix this so we don't deal with it again?
Through the chair, that would be the intent, is to do it that way. What happened was, at one time, this was the conditional use standards. There were no standards in the supplementary district regulations. And with the assisted living ordinance, a lot of the healthcare facility stuff that was modified, and that moved over to the supplementary district standards when that moved around. And so this provision has never really come up before because of how it was in the conditional use standards. This is the first time, obviously, now that it affects the by right uses, that it's coming to our attention. So our intent is to remove it in the Title 21 process and not do another ordinance, but we're going to have to look at that. This is not a common thing that comes up.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton.
You say it's uncommon. Have you made exceptions like this before?
Through the chair, it would have to come through the commission, and no, because this only since in the past several years has it been in the AMC 2145, the supplementary district regulations. Prior to that, it was in the conditional use regulations. Those had gone through a higher level of review, and previously those were hospitals developed in other situations. So this is the first time it has become an issue. Also, those existing hospitals are also older hospitals, developed at a different time, also with much larger parcels that they were built on so that they had room to grow on and develop over time as well. So that's a lot of the reasons why it's never come up before.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any further questions from the commission? Apparently not. I will open the public hearing at this time and invite the petitioner or its representative to come forward.
Madam Commissioner, members of the Commission, my name is Marianne Tuttle with Dow HKM, and I'm here representing South Central Foundation. And I want to thank you for reworking the agenda, and also thank the representatives who agreed to be delayed so that these smaller issues could get taken care of. I think Angela described adequately what we're requesting and the reasons why we're requesting it. Again, it does The hospital is a permitted use on this site. We did bring the hospital facility to the University Community Council, and again, when we were surprised with this lot size requirement, and the planning department was surprised with it, we did go back to the Community Council and tell them we were coming forward for the lot waiver, and they submitted another letter supporting the project with the lot waiver. So in order to be expeditious, I'll just leave it there and be available for questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions of the petitioner? No questions.
Thank you.
You have 8 minutes, 54 seconds of rebuttal time. This is a record. Okay. The hearing is open. Is there anyone that wishes to testify? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, the public hearing is closed. Commissioners, I'm ready for a positive motion. Mr. Phelps.
In the case of an amendment to a final conditional use for a utility substation for a 1 million gallon water reservoir.
We already dealt with that one. We're on the South Central Foundation.
Oh, God.
Pick another packet.
Jesus Christ. Well, that's happened before. Okay. Sorry about that. This is a waiver from ANC 2145.380.C.1 to allow a lesser minimum lot size of 1.77 acres when 2.5 acres are required acres for a 44-bed psychiatric hospital. I would move for the approval of this recommendation, and let's see, any conditions? Yes, just recommend approval for this change.
Okay, and Mr. Frederick has seconded the motion. Would you care to speak to your motion, Mr. Phelps?
Yeah. Actually, all my notes are on the last piece of paper in the previous case, and so it's reading from that. What we've heard from the petitioner and from staff is that this existing requirement of a lot size minimum of 2.5 acres can't seem to be supported in fact, and that there is an intention by the department to modify this section of code. We've also learned that the Community Council supports this particular change, and the petitioner has worked with the Community Council to determine whether or not this is an appropriate use or not. Finally, we've heard from staff that this particular facility is sited effectively on a 1.77 acre site, and for all these reasons, I would support this motion.
Any further discussion? Mr. Weddleton.
I'd like to add to the findings that the adjacent parkland also meets some of the requirements that would have been met by a larger lot size.
Okay. Ms. Pease?
I would also like to add to the findings that the proposed facility meets the RO zoning district regulations. Staff has shown in the packet that the parking capacity is met on site, and that the medical campus setting provides access to light, open space, and other qualities important to patients and tenants and to the surrounding uses.
And anything further? I would like to also add that this site is within the UMed district, which is designed for high-density uses of this type. And there are a lot of recreational opportunities that are nearby. We have University Lake, there are trail systems, and there's the campus-type setting. And I think it's an ideal location for a facility of this type, and very inviting, and it will set a very positive environment for a facility like this, rather than perhaps in another location. So I will be supporting the motion. Any further comments? Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, that is approved. Moving on our agenda, the next item on our agenda is case number G5 with petitioners the Municipality of Anchorage It's an ordinance amending Title 21 code sections with regard to administrative and review procedures for boards and commissions, administrative officers, and procedures for obtaining administrative variances for minor dimensional errors to include variance authority for Chapter 2109 Girdwood Land Use Regulations. Could we have the staff presentation, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In January of 2005, the Assembly adopted AMC 2190, creating zoning regulations specific to the Girdwood area of the municipality. Since that time, during implementation of these new zoning regulations, it has been determined that the regulations do not clearly provide for a variance procedure from dimensional zoning and subdivision regulations. Those are primarily, those variances go to the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals if it has to do with development of a particular lot, the ability to build a minimum reasonable use of the land, and the Platting Board if it's from the subdivision standards. So the Department has drafted this ordinance to clarify the variance procedures as applicable to 2109 Girdwood Land Use Regulations. This is an interim ordinance to go with our current code, to fit in with that as the Title 21 rewrite is finalized and fully adopted and enacted. There are provisions that have been placed into there. So this is sort of an interim ordinance. There are petitioners waiting to apply for variance or people at this time waiting for this ordinance to go through. So it has been structured to match our current code. Lot-related standards are proposed to go to ZEBA as per current procedure, and platting-related or subdivision-related issues are proposed to go to the Platting Board, signs to Urban Design Commission as in current code. Thank you.
Okay. Are there questions of staff? Apparently not. I will open the public hearing and invite anyone that would like to testify to come forward. Is there anyone to testify on this matter? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, the public hearing is closed, and the matter rests with the Commission. Mr. Phelps, did I just not take you out of the queue before? Okay. I need someone to make a motion.
I'll go ahead.
Okay.
I'll try and do it for this one.
Okay. You want to put yourself in the queue? All right. Go ahead.
Okay. In the case of 2009-012, an ordinance amending AMC Title 21 regarding variances in the Girdwood Land Use Regulations, I move for the approval of the recommendations as submitted by staff in the draft ordinance that follows on the pages following the staff analysis.
Okay. And Mr. Frederick seconded it. Is there any discussion? Okay. Apparently not. Anything, any further discussion by the Commission? Hearing none, is there any objection? Hearing none, that matter is approved. Okay. Yes.
Just one. Does staff want us to keep G4 for next week?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think Jill sent out an email about that. Thank you for the reminder.
She did. Thank you.
Could I ask a point of order here? We didn't make any findings of fact in this last case. Apparently, it's not necessary for an ordinance.
Well, I invited people to speak, and no one was in the queue or opened their mouth. So I asked if there was anyone.
So there should have been some discussion about findings of facts then.
There should have been. But there's no objection. No one objected to the motion, so it was approved.
Can we move to reconsider?
Well, if people want to, but we need to step forward to offer findings if people have findings.
Through the Chair, I don't know if in this case it's really important. It's a housekeeping sort of an emergency ordinance, if you will. But in the future, if there's not anything much to add, you can always just incorporate findings of staff if it's a late hour and you don't have anything to add. The findings are vital.
I concur.
Normally what I key off is, can you speak to your motion, please? So I didn't hear that, and so we went to discussion, so I was confused. Okay.
I'll try to help. I'll be better at reminders. Okay. All right. We are back now to what was the first item on the agenda and got moved to last, and we thank you for being gracious and waiting. And that is case number 2008-139, and the petitioner is the municipality of Anchorage, and it's a site-specific land use study for Chugach Eagle River. And may we have the presentation? And it looks like the consultants are going to do this, or is staff going to do one also?
We were just going to turn on our machine, so we're not supposing that they're not. We just wanted to get this set up.
Okay. Is staff planning to do a presentation as well as the consultant? Yes. Okay. Well, I'll let you get your machine set up and then invite staff to do their presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to do a brief introduction while the consultants are setting up their machine.
Okay.
So for the past, the Heritage Land Bank and Agnew Beck Consulting have worked on this land use study for the areas for HOB lands around the McDonald Recreation Center in the Chugach Eagle River area. So in our 2006 Chugach Eagle River comprehensive plan update, we did not designate these lands around the McDonald Center, the HOB lands, and so our comp plan basically required that HOB do a special study area to designate the land uses before they could do any kind of, I guess, disposal of it. So Agnew Beck was hired by HOB, and they did a comprehensive and responsive public involvement effort to try to address the community's concerns. The study went through several iterations with the planning department in the last several months, and so the result is this plan, which is trying to balance the needs and the wishes of the community with the Heritage Land Bank's mission, as well as trying to stay consistent with the direction that the Eagle River Comp Plan, Chugach Eagle River Comp Plan, policies and objectives. And so the plan actually went beyond the scope of a typical land use plan in that in trying to ensure the quality development that the community said they wanted through the public involvement process, this plan also provides some development objectives and standards that will hopefully guide the platting and rezoning process that would implement this study, this plan. Specifically, the plan supports a variety of housing types and densities, preserves and provides recreational opportunities to the community, supports connectivity policies from the Chugach Eagle River Comprehensive Plan update, and also preserving Class B wetlands around the Carroll Creek corridor. And after reviewing the comments that we've received from 3 municipal departments, the Chugach Community Council, and comments from the community, we support approval of this plan with some of the minor amendments that is outlined in the staff packet. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I will open the hearing at this time and invite the consultants to come forward.
Thank you very much.
And you have 10 minutes. Do you wish to reserve some of your time?
Yeah, we'll be very brief with our presentation and reserve some time.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Planning Commission. We'll just do a quick overview of the area that this plan discussed.
And can you start by stating your name for the record?
Yeah. My name is Tanya Eiden. I work at Agnew Beck Consulting, and I'm also here with Chris Beck from Agnew Beck Consulting. And we were hired by the Heritage Land Bank to do a site-specific study of approximately 140 acres kind of surrounding the Harry J. McDonald Center in Eagle River, at Chugach, actually. The largest parcel that we analyzed, we called the Carroll Creek parcel. It's approximately 92 acres. It's the furthest south parcel that you see in the PowerPoint that we have presented. The middle parcels, the Melrose Street parcels, are approximately 11 acres, and they're in kind of an existing low-density rural residential neighborhood. And the North Knoll parcel is approximately 40 acres, and it's kind of in a very undeveloped area and doesn't actually have any access to that parcel. So there's 4 parcels in 3 locations. And we initiated our study September of 2007, so we've been working on this for about a year and a half. And we started with background research and kind of outreach to community councils and local area groups. We did host 4 public meetings throughout this planning process. The first one, we presented a background report where we just provided some basic information about the parcels and heard from the community what type of development they would perhaps like to see, not see, that type of thing. So we gathered community input at that first one. We came back with a conceptual plan in November, heard from the community again at an informal workshop, refined that. In February of 2008, we presented a more refined plan, and then March 6th, in March, we presented our more formal document and plan recommendations. And had extensive community input, and we did, I believe, incorporate all of the public comments that we received to the plan that you guys received. So the Heritage Land Bank reviewed the plan in May of last year and approved it with some minor recommendations and changes. And we, just to talk about our outreach methods that we use before every meeting, not every meeting, before 2 of the 4 meetings, 2 of them are more informal, and then 2 of them are kind of more formal public meetings. We did send flyers to the surrounding neighborhoods. And we also, through the process, kind of gathered an email list of up to about 95 people that included the community councils. It included the local area assembly and representatives, House and Senate representatives, and also the community members who attended the meetings and anybody else who expressed interest in the plan. We also had a website that we logged all the updates to the plan and made all the drafts available for review, and generally would send out an email to the listing of all the folks. And also the community itself kind of got organized, and they would inform their neighbors when there were updates to the plan too. So folks who didn't necessarily have email access would also kind of hear from their neighbors when changes were happening. And so our next steps for this plan are to, for seeking planning and zoning review and approval, and then after it goes before this body, it goes to the assembly. And Chris is going to kind of talk in more detail about the plan and our recommendations.
So if I'm reading my watch right, there's about 5.5 minutes left or something like that. I'll be quick. So some of you have seen some of this before. This is really just a brief overview. What's in the plan. The physical characteristics will be pretty obvious just by looking at the map. The Carroll Creek parcel, the rural parcel, has a fairly substantial wetland and stream corridor on its southern edge. The remainder of that parcel is fairly well-drained, attractive. It's a reasonable site for development. The same is true of the Mulderell Street parcels. The 2 of them are joining parcels to the north of that. The North Knoll parcel is inaccessible, steeper, and in general is judged to be not very physically suited for development. So the land use recommendations for the area, early on it was fairly clear, and community agreed, Heritage Land Bank agreed, that North Knoll parcel was a location that really wasn't suited for development, and the recommendation was that we retain public ownership and either traded to the state park or retained by the municipality and used for open space purposes, including recreation. The remainder of the areas where the attention of the process was focused. And a little bit of context setting. This is an interesting site because it touches 2 very different worlds. On the west side, you have a Fred Meyer, a large shopping area, Spanard Builders. It's right next to a major freeway access point coming in on the North Eagle River freeway get-off. So that's an urban side, a commercial side. On the west side, it goes and touches portions of Chugach State Park and a Metro Wild area. So across that transition, we tried to lay out land uses that followed that gradient. So on the yellow colors, the Mulberry parcels and what's called Carroll Creek A, the ones in the yellow color, the proposal is to essentially match the intensity development of the surrounding neighbors, which is approximately 1 to 2 dwelling units per acre. The recommendation of the plan is to match that general density and that character, single-family detached homes. The green area is intended to be retained in public ownership. Portions of that may in the future become a park, but it's clear that it's a site that merits retention and not being developed. The two smaller parcels to the left, the ones that are between McDonald Center and the Fred Meyer area, are proposed for slightly higher residential development, between 7 and 10 and then 7 and 15 dwelling units per acre. On those two parcels, the ones in red and in orange, there's a cap on the number of units that would be allowed in the plan, 50 in one area, 60 in another. So what you essentially have is a matching of the residential densities in the area that's already developed and a slightly higher density residential development to take advantage of its proximity to the commercial areas nearby as well as the school and the McDonald Center. The main issues that we heard about over the course of this project we've tried to summarize here, and I think on some of these we feel confident the plan meets fairly directly what the community was asking for. And one in particular, I think the community was not totally satisfied by the conclusion recommended in the plan. Keeping the character of the neighborhoods, people were clear about that, described those qualities. We've tried to make recommendations in the plan for how to do that, particularly in the single-family residential areas that are proximate to those existing neighborhoods. Protecting well and water supplies, there's legitimate concerns about the limits of groundwater in the area, and there's a process in place through the platting process to ensure that there's sufficient well water as in advance of the decision to proceed with the actual platting of those parcels. Not funneling new traffic to the neighborhood, that was probably the principal issue that concerned folks. After a lot of discussion, the conclusion of the plan is that there ought to be a new connection off the, I'm going to switch back to the previous one so we can point at it. A new connection that runs from the existing road that comes off the Old Glen Highway up by the McDonald Center, and that would continue through to create a second way in and out of what is today essentially a very large cul-de-sac. All the development that's shown on the right-hand side of this map is served by a single point of exit, and this plan would provide a back door to that area. The community wasn't enthused about that. Our conclusion that on balance it was good for the safety of the area and wouldn't create a substantial increase in the traffic just because of the location of the land. The other couple items were a few people would have preferred all of this area be retained in public ownership and used for parks and other purposes, but the conclusion was that the balance in the plan was reasonable. And the final one was a very legitimate concern to make sure that walking is safe for kids going to the school and for other residents in the area. The proposal to improve the road up McDonald Drive requires the retention of sidewalks, and the parcels have some development standards that require improvements that allow that to be a safe area for walking. So really a burst of words is a short overview of the plan, and we'll be happy to answer other questions as they may arise.
Hey, are there questions? I don't, from the commission. I don't, okay, Ms. Yoshimura?
I guess I have a generic question through the chair. What is the difference between a comprehensive plan and a master plan?
Mr. Robin.
Through the chair, Commissioner Yoshimura, what in effect this is that we have a land use designation that is a blank slate right now. So we have a land use plan associated with our comprehensive plan, which are the list of plans at the beginning of Title 21, whether it's Anchorage 2020, a land use plan, Girdwood area plan, those sorts of things. So in effect, what we're doing by eventually having Assembly approval of this document is amending our comprehensive plan by assigning land uses to the areas that are within this study area. Outside of that, this plan has indicated that those areas, as they develop, would be developed with certain specific characteristics. And it's through that implementation that there's actually a recommendation for, when the development occurs, that there be a further master planning or site plan reviews associated with those developments.
Through the chair, I just find it very difficult to comprehend a plan that doesn't have a traffic impact analysis. I mean, we're asked here to approve, I'm not sure how many units, but a sizable number of units. And I am somewhat familiar with the traffic congestion along the Old Glen Highway, and I find it difficult coming from the private sector, where if we were going to do a master plan for this amount of acreage, we would have to provide a lot more specific information than what is available in this document. And so I'm just trying to understand the difference between what a comprehensive plan is and what a private developer would have to do if he were seeking a zoning, a rezone, for example. And I don't understand the difference.
If I may continue, those are good questions. Essentially, the steps that you refer to, which would be rezones and would be a platting process, all of those are still processes that would need to occur. So during those processes, it is likely that there'd be further review, potentially, if required by traffic engineering, a particular traffic study. This particular plan has gone through agency reviews. You see some of the comments in the plan. Traffic has reviewed it, and I'm sure the consultants or Heritage Land Bank may be more familiar with the bulk of those comments. But I guess one way to think about it is there's still a number of things that need to happen before this becomes an area that's developed. We've tried to highlight those in the final section, the implementation section. Those include the process that the Heritage Land Bank goes through to dispose of lands. That includes a platting process so that these can be track platted and rezoned accordingly. And then ultimately there's some development review processes that would also happen.
Thank you. I understand all that, but at the same time, we're still asked to approve specific areas for relatively high density without knowing what the traffic impact of that density is going to be on the surrounding community. And that's a concern of mine. Okay. Thank you.
Point of order.
Right. We're getting there.
Okay.
Ms. Pease?
Yes, Madam Chair. I guess I'd look for some guidance on how to address my questions. We did have the opportunity for a work session, which I was really grateful for, but we hadn't gotten the document. So I do have some detailed questions about consistencies in the document, and I don't know whether to raise any of them here or expect
I think maybe after the public has testified, then we can go through any questions that we have. And rather than at this time debate or, this isn't the time to debate or to discuss specific philosophies or theories. So I think maybe I see Mr. Isham is in the queue. Do you want to defer and wait until after the hearing? We can do that, and then we can get into very pointed and specific questions and issues. The public hearing is open. Is there anyone that wishes to testify with regard to this matter? If so, I would encourage you all to come down front. And thank you for being patient this evening. Go ahead and come forward. And just state your name for the record.
Mary Lemmings,
Okay.
and we live on Malaspina, and it's right on the corner where the new road's going to be coming through. And I just want to thank you for letting me speak for just a moment, but I know this is probably going to happen, and of course, it's right in our backyard. And I just would like to make sure that our neighborhood can be kept as well as it is right now. I know it's going to change with all the traffic that's going to be coming through, because it's all, most of the town is all south, so most of the traffic that's going to be, Savage Drive and the other connecting roads are going to come right past our place, where we never had any traffic before. And to make the area, like in the Carroll Creek area, of course, that's probably what we're concerned about mostly, is make it as low densely populated as possible. There's going to be a lot of traffic, and I appreciate Ms. Yoshimura about thinking about the traffic, because that is a big issue for us. It's going to change a lot. So I really don't have anything that's specific to say, just to really consider it is our backyard, and thank you.
Well, thank you for coming out tonight.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I have a couple of questions.
There were a couple of questions for you, Ms. Lemmings.
Yeah. Ms. Lemmings, you said you live on Malaspina?
Yeah.
Okay, on the north or south end of it, or the middle?
Well, we live right on the corner, Mendenhall.
Oh, Mendenhall. Okay, fine. So you're on the south end of it. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you understand that those lots that are going to be developed there are going to be 40,000 square feet or more, rural residential, and I assume that it's R6 most likely where you live now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's not going to be any different density than what you got?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I think, Ms. Pease, did you have a question for her?
Yes, and this might actually be to the consultant. The connection between the Muldrow parcels and the Carroll Creek parcels still isn't quite clear to me, because this document says that there will be no road connection directly through the Muldrow parcel. So where is the traffic supposed to, what is it supposed to do, swing over to Nob Hill Drive, or how is that connection made from the extended McDonald Drive all the way to Fish Hatchery Road?
Yes, if you could respond.
Not sure.
And if you could talk really loud.
I can speak loudly and explain this. I apologize, I can't. I'll describe.
Could do the overhead, perhaps.
Yeah, use the cursor. Let's see if I can make that work. Is that visible?
Yeah.
So the question, if I understood, Ms. Pease asked, is what kind of a road connection might cross through these areas?
Yes.
And the intent there was to provide reasonable access off either the north side, the Fish Hatchery side, or the south side, off the Malaspina side, but to deliberately design that access so it didn't create an inviting and direct route. I think we're sympathetic to what people have said about the concerns about traffic in the area. So it would not, for example, create a through route that would cut right through the center of that and connect directly down to Malaspina. It might be possible to have a route that came in from one side, maybe off in here. The exact design has not been done. But the intent of the plan is to make sure that there isn't a route that encourages through traffic through that site. I don't think that would be attractive for the people who might eventually own homes there, and to disperse the traffic so it would tend to come wrapping around the east, like the example that you asked about.
Okay, so there may be a road across those Muldrow parcels, but it's not intended to be a direct...
It's going to be indirect and discouraging to through traffic because of its indirect nature.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Would the next person that would like to testify please come forward?
My name is Sandra Quimby, and I live in the Fire Lake, Alaska subdivision, which McLaren Street up there. My concerns I think, first of all, the process has been a great one, and it's been a great way to involve the community, and I commend Agnew-Beck for the work that they've done. My concern particularly is on the zoning, and in the document there's discussion in the verbiage a lot of places, for example, and what you have out in front tonight, talking in the Muldrow parcels, low-density residential, 1 dwelling unit per acre, Carroll Creek, the low-density residential, 1 dwelling unit per acre. But evidently, as zoning is now, I understand, you have R6 and R7, and there's some discussion about this, and in some of the charts and graphing, it says 1 to 2 dwelling units per acre. I think the community made it quite clear that they would like it to be consistent with the current zoning and to comply with that and to have the 1 dwelling unit per acre. The thought is brought up, of course, that with on-site septic systems we would be limited to the 40,000, and that would be fine. But I can see a possibility, particularly with the Carroll Creek parcel, the A section of public water coming through, making that then suddenly viable to have 2 dwelling units per acre. And that is not what the community spoke to, what's addressed here and what's addressed in the verbiage. So my concern is that it would be preferably the R6, and I'd call your attention to area number 82-11S, which is the special limitations, and I know you're trying to get away from a lot of special limitations, but I think before zoning this so it could be different, in that this was done in 1982 on August 10th, and the community sought this out, and it was passed. Not necessarily something that I chose, but I support the fact that they made this effort, and amongst other things it says all other property included in this rezoning ordinance shall be restricted to a minimum lot size of 1 acre. So that's my concern, is not 2 dwelling units per acre in the Muldrow section, HLB I-072, HLB I-073, and then in A of Carroll Creek. And I call your attention to the fact that the triangular parcel in the Muldrow is already zoned with this R2 ASL.
And what's that ordinance number again, ma'am?
It's AO number 82-111, parentheses S. And it was August 10th, 1982. And as the community in the meeting spoke, this is what they were looking, knowing to be our zoning.
Mr. Weddleton has a question for you.
Just one comment. We got your email with your comments, and thanks. It was very clear and easy to follow and detailed, so that's real helpful. So now are your comments the Muldrow, looks like in your email, just looking at these Muldrow parcels, and now you're adding on Carroll Creek has identical issues?
Well, as I was driving here, it suddenly occurred to me that the Carroll Creek ought to be looked at too, and it falls under the same situation essentially as the Muldrow. And I haven't done a detailed analysis of that one, but it's the same situation of stating 1 dwelling unit per acre, but yet how would that comply? Because I guess the R6 is actually a little bit larger than an acre and a quarter, and so that's something the community, before you go to the 2, that certainly wasn't something that the community supported.
Could follow up on that
Yes.
a little bit?
Yes, you may.
A couple of us found that there's confusion in the discussion of the DUAs on here. And one thing that I thought maybe it was coming from is that they're looking at a kind of conservation subdivision way here, where on average it would be 1 DUA, but might be denser in certain parts, and that would let you have this green belt and so on. So I don't know if that is what is kind of in here some way. And how would the community feel about that? You get more open space, but the homes are a little bit closer. Was that discussed?
Would you like me to?
Well, either one, whoever can address it.
I don't think that I think that you're correct, that it's not as clear as it needs to be, is probably a first response. And it turns out the answer, I think, is a little different in the D and C areas the 7 to 10 and 10 to 15 DUA area than it is for the two that were just being discussed. So maybe I'll take a minute and sort of explain how I think it's going and then turn the microphone back over. But just to try to explain what the intent was, because I don't think there's ambiguity about that. The intent was really to try to match the general character and the density of the surrounding neighborhood for those two yellow areas, the Muldrow parcel and the Carroll Creek A parcel. And the existing neighborhood, it was a little hard to track down, and I think we were late figuring out exactly what the zoning was because of the special limitation that isn't obvious from the immediate label. So we looked at the size of the parcels and the character of the area, and we ended up using language that said approximately 1 unit per acre, and meaning that approximate to be there because there are parcels that are three-quarter acre parcels, a few that get down to a half acre, and then some that are closer to 1 acre. There are a few duplexes in the neighborhood. So I believe that no one would disagree that the plan is very clear and needs to stay clear on trying to match the character of that existing neighborhood. So that part's clear. The application of it gets a little more subtle and complex, and the question then is the appropriate zoning, which we're not really establishing at this point. All this is doing is setting a general land use designation. A subsequent effort comes back in and sets the zoning. But currently the thought is that the R7 is a fairly good match to the surrounding neighbors, and that is it allows either half to 1 acre parcel size for the two yellow areas, those two single-family detached areas. Where it can be, where it's different then, I'll just jump ahead and get all this out and then you all can talk further. The two areas that are further west, the C and D area, in those areas, it does set out, and this is more appropriate to your question, Commissioner Weddleton, in those areas it says, here are the intended densities, 7 to 10 dwelling units for one, 10 to 15 in the other. In those areas, it is more like a conservation subdivision, although that concept wasn't explicitly addressed. What it does is it says, here's the kinds of housing we'd like, up to this types of density, and if you do the math, it turns out that maybe the actual density is lower than that. The reason is because it would allow townhouses that might, on their individual site, have a density closer to 10 to 15 or 7 to 10. And so it would, if you looked at it in terms of the individual parcel, that density would be achieved, whereas the average for the whole would not exceed the numbers that are in the plan, the 50 units maximum on one, 60 units maximum on the other. So just in giving that explanation, I can imagine causes maybe your eyes to spin a little bit, but I think the part that's clear for the two yellow parcels is aim to match the general character of the surrounding area, which is a half, 3/4 to 1 acre. And consideration in that is the fact that if you don't have, as you all know, public water and sewer, that 40,000 square foot is the minimum. So we translated that in our explanations to the community as an expectation of approximately 1 acre per unit and estimated the numbers to coincide with the acreages of the unit. So I think correctly, as was just stated, that the expectation expressed in the plan was about 1 dwelling unit per acre for those two yellow-colored parcels. So I hope that helps. That was maybe more words than you were looking for. I can clarify if it's helpful.
Okay, thanks. Did the commissioners have questions for Ms. Quimby? We kind of took a little hiatus there, and I don't want to, discourage you from asking her questions you may have had.
Well, I could ask some follow-up on that maybe would help us. And so now R7 is half acre, but septic needs 40,000 square feet. So, and you seem to understand these things pretty well. What would you shoot for?
Well, it sounds as if the R6 would be in line with where it says there might be no more than 10 or 11 units on the Muldrow parcel, and on the Carroll Creek, I think there's words somewhere that's saying no more than the 10. And again, I'm just addressing the yellow parcels. So it seems to me that our 6 would be more appropriate, and I know that the water and sewer, of course, without that, it's a moot point, but I can see water and sewer coming to A in Carroll Creek, because it already goes up to the rec center. I think they'll have a harder time bringing it the other way. And I think the community feels pretty comfortable with everything that's going on at this point, that that's what they're expecting. I think they'd be hit with a big surprise if suddenly there were maybe 20 and 22 units there. And then I think we'd want to readdress traffic. I mean, there's a lot of things that we want to be talked more about. But they were comfortable, I think, by and large, as a community with the 1 per acre, which evidently, unless you leave it as R2ASL, which then it would be, and if you have to go to something new, R6 seems to be more consistent with what the ordinance is now.
Good, thank you.
Okay. And Ms. Pease, did you have a question for her?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, where is the existing R2ASL? Because my understanding is that Muldrow parcels and Carroll Creek A don't have a designation or zoning right now.
The triangular Muldrow parcel is part of this zoning. The small rectangular on the left side is public lands and institution, and I think that was when the school was built. The intent was that that might be used at some point, and that was a site in reserve. So that does require a rezone for this to go through at some point. And I don't know what the Carroll Creek zoning is, honestly.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to testify this evening? Anyone at all? Anyone at all? Seeing and hearing no one, do commissioners have questions of the consultants before I close the hearing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Boy, my queue is full, and Miss Pease beat.
Oh, rats.
Oh, rats. Okay, Miss Pease.
Yeah, I have a number of questions, and I don't know that, they should possibly be hashed out in a committee of the whole or something, but there was one that I wanted to follow up on with Mr. Beck. When you spoke just now, you said several times that parcel C was 7 to 10 and parcel D was 11 to 15, but in the document, both in the summary tables on page 6 and in the discussion and the implementation back in the back, I think it's on page 41 or 2, parcel D is always listed at 7 to 15, and this was one of my questions about consistency. It says there on page 6 that there's a greater than 11 DUA requirement, and yet the plan imposes a maximum of 60 units, which would be 7 times 9, not even 9 DUA. So there are a number of questions I have about consistencies with the land use classifications and the land use designations and then the dwelling unit limits.
One part of an explanation is that we were using the categories that are set up within the Chugach Eagle River plan. So that was our palette. So we worked with those categories. And I would admit there's a chance that where it's the 7 through 15 on the table on page 6, that should be 11 to 15. And that's just a factual question. We could go back and check the category and make sure that's correct. It may be that that's just incorrect on that 7, and maybe that should be 11 to 15, and I just don't recall that. Maybe, I don't know, Ron, do you recall if the medium density residential is listed as 7 to 15, or if it's 11 to 15?
I believe.
Yeah. But I think we were trying to use the palette that came out. I think what you're seeing here, for a while we wanted to allow that range, but ultimately we concluded, let's try to be specific and use the Chugach Eagle River categories. And so that may be a typo, that it's 7 to 15, it should be 11, 15. I know that's not the full range of the questions you're asking, but that's one piece.
Right, because it then runs into the problem that you've imposed a maximum of 60 units, and that would be less than 11 DUA. So anyway, there are a number of questions.
So that goes to the question that Commissioner Weddleton asked, which is, by setting those densities, we're referring to a project that has not yet been developed. At some point, someone will come in and purchase portions of that. They may purchase a single lot, and at that point, the allowed density within a small lot that may be found within the larger area could not exceed this density designation. So, and secondarily, the total number of units within that whole area could not exceed that peak number. And so what it implies, as John suggests, is that portions of that area would not be developed. There would be open space. So it's two ways of communicating the intention. One is the maximum density of any given single individual development within the larger area, not to exceed these density limits, and then the total number of units within the larger area to stay within that numerical cap.
Okay, that might need to be explained a little bit in the text, but it makes more sense now. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Weddleton, you're next.
I was caught up in that because that was a big issue. We have a list of questions here that I have, and then Commissioner Pease too. Would this be the time?
Well, maybe if these are things we maybe need to discuss in the committee of the whole, maybe we should wait if they're not.
We're fine, and the consultants could stay and take part in that.
Well, it depends. Let's see for the people that have not so many questions.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Isham.
And the only question I had is from the testimony of Ms. Quimby, there was implication that triangular-shaped parcel there on the Muldrow Street to the east had some development on it. Does it have development on it?
As far as I know, it does not.
It does not. Okay.
It does have that existing zoning that she described, but it's currently vacant.
Vacant.
Best of my knowledge.
R2SL.
R2ASL.
R2AS. Okay. That's all I have.
Okay. Mr. Frederick.
Okay, kind of the same subject. If I understand correctly, the SL on that R2A then limits the lot sizes to an acre minimum. Is that right?
I'm not confident I know the answer. We have an expert with us.
Hand, and I should have asked her.
Yeah. Why don't you answer the question, because I think you've got it.
And you can take this. In the Lake Ridge, it's a large area, and in the Lake Ridge Terrace subdivision, they're restricted to a minimum lot size of 1/2 acre, and I actually think that's on the other side of the New Glen Highway. And it says, all the property included in this rezoning ordinance shall be restricted to a minimum lot size of 1 acre.
And that applies to that Muldrow parcel?
Yes, you may.
Okay.
Okay.
And we can put it into the record, Mr. Frederick.
I'll just pass it down.
Pass it down to the secretary.
I think the process revealed the challenges of working with SLs, because it was only late in the game we deciphered exactly what was intended there.
Right, okay.
Yeah, but the SLs are clear, and that's the designation on it. And it doesn't matter what the plan says, that's the zoning until it's changed. Okay, Ms. Yoshimura.
Ma'am?
Oh, were you not done? I'm sorry.
Thanks. May I?
Yes.
Thank you. So, I guess I understand the intent is not to is to put it into some zoning that doesn't have an SL attached to it, just because that's cleaner and neater. But then along the way, you made a conscious decision to recommend R7 rather than R6, knowing that the potential down the road sometime is that there could be half-acre lots.
Yeah. We actually didn't make a recommendation on the zoning category. What the plan did was essentially, which is summarized on that map, and said number of units approximately and density approximately 1 acre, and then it provides the policy background that says let's work consistently with the surrounding area.
I'm looking at page 43 of your plan here, and it says recommended zoning for Muldrow and Section A of Carroll Creek is R7.
Well, I stand corrected.
Thank you. So, and I guess what I'm hearing from Ms. Quimby, and I think there were other comments that were implied or included in the packet somewhere, was that the community was uncomfortable with the possibility that there may be kind of blanket half acre lots if public water and sewer was available. Okay?
Yes.
And you understand that too, right?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you. I apologize. Ms. Yoshimura.
My questions are in regards to C and D of the Carroll Creek residential. So as I understand it correctly, C is planned for 50 residential, low, medium, 50 units, and D is planned for 60 units. Can you show me on the map the primary egress and the secondary egress for those parcels? And what are the conditions of those egresses at this time?
Sure.
If I point at this, work.
Sure.
The short answer is that there are no primary egresses today. All there is a driveway. It goes to the McDonald's Center. There's the operator for that. The municipal parking department are planning to improve this road. So we put in more than conceptual location purposes a route that might serve those two. And a simple loop like that would achieve two access points for those two areas. But there hasn't been any detailed site planning in those faults.
So in the southwestern tip, is there a road there? No.
This whole area would be accessed off this road. So you can swing a loop down here and have two ways in and out.
You know, for 110 units, I don't think fire and traffic would approve that, because they would consider the driveway improvement to be one primary road and not allow two egresses off the primary road, would not qualify. So I guess this is my...
Okay. And that's those are good comments, but what I'd like to do is when we get done with our questions that we need answers to, I think we need to think about going into the committee of the whole and having these kind of conversations where we don't have to be so formal. Yes.
Well, that might just might be a timely addition, because whether that's true or not, what you potentially could do is extend that road that goes next to AIH into that area, right?
Shall I say something?
You can say something. And Mr. Robinson, you're in the queue too. We have.
I think this goes to Commissioner earlier question: what's the function of this plan? And right now, the intent is to lay out general intentions for you, to pass those through fire, public works, and other groups, and see if those general intentions seem reasonable. Recognizing that subsequent steps, HLD has to go through a planning and zoning process, and then secondly, they have to go through a land sales process, and then there's a requirement for a site plan review process, and then a site plan review. So at each of those stages, the points that you bring up will be forced to be brought forward. The initial judgment was that by the fire department and public works, that they could make this work. They haven't sat down and looked at it in detail, and you may be correct. But so far, the indication was they thought that that would work. And as far as John's thought, I think it's possible that roads could come in off the south, but probably unlikely on down. I think that the expectation was that things would come in off the Small Road Drive, and if you had enough room to have several access points off that road. One of the reasons that this other road was suggested is so there wouldn't be a singular, only one way in and out of the area. today is the case.
Mr. Robinson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I would just like to echo what Mr. Beck just said, and that is the primary purpose of this plan is to assign land use classifications, period. Now, because of the extensive public process and because the community had very certain desires on how they would like to see development occur in there, the plan attempts to lay out some processes that make it clear how we're going to get from what it says in the plan to what actually would be on the ground. And I think you all can probably identify a lot of past planning exercises that somehow when we got to the end of the road, we somehow lost that vision in there. And so by attempting to lay out development standards and attempting to suggest what those zoning districts may be, because this is not a zoning action. This would still be required to go through a rezoning process. We'll at least have an idea we're all on the same page on what we may see down the road. But again, think about it in two sort of steps here. The primary purpose is land use classifications. A second line of kind of discussion and clarification may have to do with the implementation of how we get to this development down the road. And I just think if you think in those terms, it may be a helpful conversation.
Thank you. Mr. Frederick.
So, following up on Mr. Robinson's comment, then, is it appropriate then since this plan is suggesting land use classifications, to have recommended zoning here at all? I'm on the top of page 42 in the implementation steps to development. The end of the first paragraph says that as an officially adopted element of the comprehensive plan of the municipality, the plan will be recognized as official municipal policy. Well, if official municipal policy is that the recommended zoning is R7 for Mulgrove Street and Section A of Carroll Creek, then that's a fairly strong statement. So what would be the harm then in taking that column out that says recommended zoning and having the land use classification suggestions in there as the kind of the final element of the plan?
I think the best way to answer that question through the chair is that there are a number of things that, as much as we don't like special limitations, that the only way we'd get the things that the community desires would be through special limitations. And so by recommending what that zoning would eventually be, by suggesting use these standards in here to craft special limitations, and those include both density and design, that's why there's suggestions that kind of lead us down the path to the particular zoning. If it makes folks more comfortable to take away the actual zoning designation, but be very clear on the overall density and what those special limitations, would still be, I think that would be effective as well. But it's because it's not simply R6 development. In fact, it's somewhere in between, an R7 and an R6. It is of the standards that is not generally a by right standard. If you were to go out and buy a lot, which you could do, it's way beyond that. There are some strings attached to future development. And so the question becomes, how do you ensure that as this land gets developed, that actually occurs? And unless we spell out, well, there are a couple of things. There's a special limitation that would be a part of the zoning. There might be plat notes associated. There would be a site plan review because we have to sort of lay that out, lest we really raise expectations but not have those expectations realized.
And I might, if I could add just a caboose to that statement. I think what Tyler's described could be thought of in two categories. And your response to his thoughts, I would suggest, would be in two categories. The development standards, if you look on page 34 and 35, those are really the key way of delivering on the intent of the the community has expressed about the character development that they'd like. They've got a fairly vivid example just across the street on the west side of the old Glen of, I think it's fair to say, not particularly successful or desirable form of housing, but the density is fairly similar to what we're talking about. And so there's a real determined intent to make clear in the plan for the community that the kinds of development that were appropriate here needed to not have some of the undesirable qualities that we've seen at that density. So half of, I think, what Tyler is describing is outlined in particular on pages 34 and 35 with development standards that ultimately would be intended to be attached as special limitations to a future zone. So that's half of, to recapitulate what Tyler said. The other half, I think Commissioner Frederick has hit on directly, is, well, what's the right specific zoning category? And I think that's a separate question that fairly could be raised. And is it appropriate? I don't think it's appropriate. I would suggest to consider not including the recommendations for future special limitations attached to whatever zone's used. But a separate question is it reasonable to recommend R7? Maybe it ought to recommend R6 or R7 or R6 or neither. So I just would suggest separating those two things as you think about what Tyler said.
Okay. Ms. Pease, you're next.
Yes, just to follow up on Mr. Beck, I think I heard you say it is appropriate to consider special limitations that would be attached to the zoning.
It is.
Okay, all right. To follow up on Mr. Robinson, the land use classifications are not all we're dealing with. We are talking about the details, and one of the details is the access patterns, and that goes hand in glove with the land use classifications. And another is the land ownership. So I had questions along those lines, and I don't know whether to plunge into my list of questions or not.
I'm sorry. I was stretching my back.
I wondered whether all the short, succinct, the people with the short list.
I don't know. I have Mr. Weddleton and Ms. Yoshimura back in the queue, and I don't know whether their lists of questions are short. Probably not Mr. Weddleton's, but perhaps Ms. Yoshimura, do you have a short question?
Well, I do. I have a short question, but and I know that I'm not supposed to get into specifics. But
I'm not supposed to just make comments at this point in time.
I can't help myself.
But we can try. It's hard.
On page 37 and 38, you brought up the idea of what would be better development. I would just like to point out that of the three out of the four signs could not be built in Anchorage under the current or the future Title 21 rewrite as it is exists or is proposed. The driveways don't meet the standard, and the road right-of-ways do not meet the standard for either single-family or condominium development. And so we're asked to approve a comprehensive plan that could not be built under current or the proposed future standards.
That was good. You did well, Ms. Yoshimura. Okay, and I don't know if there's any comment to that. Mr. Isham?
I guess I have a question for staff. If you read on page 42, they indicate that it's part of the Chugach-Eagle River Comprehensive Plan, which was updated in 2006. And if you look at the comprehensive plan for Chugach-Eagle River, it doesn't go into near the amount of detail that's contained in this site-specific development plan. And so I just wonder, does it make sense to be more detailed than the actual comprehensive plan is in itself? I mean, I wonder what your reasoning is to why it's so detailed as compared to the comprehensive. It seems to me all we're trying to do is draw goose eggs on a map and say, this is going to be residential 7 to 10, this is going to be residential 11 to 15, this is going to be less than one dwelling unit per acre, and fine. And then the rezoning and the platting and all of that stuff will take care of all of the rest of these details.
Through the chair, I think that's an astute observation, and I think the distinction that we've been sort of trying to lay out, albeit probably not doing a great job of it, is that we are in fact trying to amend that comprehensive plan map, the part of the map that we can show you that actually has hash marks in some of those areas that says special study area, and even though one of those particular areas has underlying zoning, like one of the citizens testified to, it doesn't have a land use classification. So we're trying to sort of fix that here tonight. That said, when we asked the same question to HOB and the consultant, and the response was, you can't do that without having some other assurances to the community as part of the process. And then we get into sort of this second level of policy that helps guide us through these other rezoning and platting processes. So it is indeed more detailed than the comp plan. It would amend the comp plan map and also have some very site-specific requirements before development would occur in the future.
Okay. That answer your question?
Well, it is an answer.
It is an answer. Okay. All right, Mr. Weddleton, it's your turn.
Back to this R6, R7. If you have to have minimum 40,000 square feet to do well and septic anyway, and R7, other than that, I think has just different side setbacks and so on. And I live in the heart of R6, and when I drove around this area, that's R6. And I know there's exceptions within the hillside area that's zoned R6. It's all surrounded by R6, and one of my lots is under 1.25 acres. So why not make this R6? I mean, to me, it's R6.
Well, if I may, it's not R6. I mean, there are duplexes in there, there are half-acre lots, there are full-acre lots. I mean, it really is a combination, but I wouldn't say that R7 is inappropriate. And I think it really does meet the definition of 1 to 2 DUA currently. One of the really confusing things about the existing zoning is that the special limitation doesn't apply to the whole. It actually calls out particular lots within there. So there's a distinction. The zoning isn't the same even within the zoning district. It applies to certain lots to the north of those parcels differently than the parcels to the south. Even so, the existing development in the south doesn't comply with the underlying zoning. It's grandfathered in. So I think therein lies the challenge of finding something that's both fairly consistent with the zoning, but also, more importantly, probably consistent with the development pattern. The compromise was with R6, you'd have to go a minimum 1.25 acre lot. With R7, if the body could decide, right now there are caps on the development, with in effect create, as Ms. Pease has pointed out, an unrealistic density range that can actually be achieved. But it's realistic to assume that those special limitations include a cap on a density, which would get you probably closer to R6, but a little bit smaller than R6. So again, I think unfortunately we got development that occurred as it was bound to occur in Anchorage, and then when the area-wide zoning came through, it didn't exactly clarify things for the future, and that's what this plan is attempting to do.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Mr. Weddleton, do you have more?
Not on this specific topic, no.
Okay. Ms. Pease. Twins.
Yes, I guess I'll just start my list, going down my list. I got a little bit of a response on the need to clarify the zoning range, 7 to 15, for example, versus the limit, and I think that needs to be spelled out more clearly. But there are a couple questions from my list that haven't come up. On page 3 and page 34, I'm wondering why the North Knoll parcel is recommended as a trade. And I have the general question of whether Heritage Land Bank sometimes gives land to other public or even private agencies for public purposes, such as road right-of-ways or road realignments, the new crime lab, and that sort of thing.
Would you like?
Ms. Pease, my name is Bill Meaner. I'm with Heritage Land Bank. I'm the director. The purpose of making lands available for public use does not dictate for the municipality to give that land to the state of Alaska. We're good neighbors with the Chugach State Park, and we would like to exchange properties to allow more gateway access to the park. And there are legislative priorities that have been suggested that would give funding to both the state and to the municipality, which would allow better access routes and trailhead design for the state park. That being said, it's not our mission, HLB's mission, to give land to the state park. This particular parcel is an isolated piece of land surrounded by park, and so it naturally would be an attraction for the state park. We're looking for an exchange with them or other lands within the municipality that they would like to exchange for this property. That would give us an opportunity to build a trailhead or road development to the park. Did I answer your question?
I have two follow-up questions. First, my question was, does the Heritage Land Bank sometimes give land to other entities for public purposes? And one specific example would be the road right-of-ways. Is it always sold to the project management and engineering or to the DOT, or if there's a parcel or right-of-way that crosses Heritage Land Bank land, is that road right-of-way just granted?
Most often that land is sold as right-of-way access. You also mentioned the crime lab, and that land that the crime lab is going to be placed on for a public purpose is not being sold to the State of Alaska Crime Lab. But it is made available through a lease, long-term lease option.
Okay, so I think that answers my question. There's no requirement that you sell.
There is no requirement that we give property away to the state.
Nor any requirement that if you want to transfer it, you have to sell it. That's my question.
If we are able to transfer it and there are no reverter provisions that on that particular parcel that is being traded or disposed of, then yes, we could sell it to a private individual.
No, that's still not my question. Can you transfer a piece of land without sale? And have you done this before?
We cannot transfer without a disposal, sale, or lease.
Okay. But in the case of the crime lab, it can be?
A lease.
A lease, okay. The other question I had, in your response, you said that Heritage Land Bank's intent to obtain from Chugach State Park land that would provide trailhead access, but I'm not sure I saw that anywhere in the plan. And so I guess part of my concern was that there would be pressure on the park to give away some of its borderlands for other kinds of uses. And if this is the intent of HLB to acquire trailhead sites, parking sites, could that be stated in the plan as the purpose of a trade?
It's not part of this particular area. I was talking generically about the entire area of the municipality and not necessarily this specific Eagle River site plan.
Okay, so if the public needs access sites in other areas along the border of the park. Is HLB willing to say that the purpose of the trade would be to improve access by acquiring trailheads or access points at other areas along the boundary of the park?
That is a true statement.
Okay, you'd be willing to say that? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? I have no one in the queue. You're back in the queue, Ms. Pease.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay.
With regard to ownership, I was a little bit confused on pages 4, 32, and 33 over future use and ownership of Carroll Creek, the Natural Resource Corridor Area B. Page 4 says manage the corridor to be substantially undisturbed. Page 31 says this 26 acres will remain in state or public ownership, as does page 43. But on page 32, there's a section that discusses B, C, and D together, and I've quoted this in my comments. Nothing in this plan rules out that ski development advocates could conceivably be the party to acquire the HLB parcel once it's offered for disposal. So it sounds to me as if there's a contradiction there.
I think I could explain that quickly if that would be helpful.
Okay.
You can just tell me when quickly is up.
Okay.
I think the clarification there is that the first of the two statements refers specifically to the corridor, and the latter, the one on page 32, refers to 3 parcels, 2 of which are intended for sale. So there's no intent to waver from the initial intent. Retaining public ownership when it comes to the corridor, that's the intent. If by some very small turn of events, improbable turn of events, the ski area was to move forward, then the corridor would still remain in public ownership. It might be used in part for skiing activities. And those other parcels, if I get my numbers right, C and D, might be used to support ski area development. But the Carroll Creek corridor is intended to remain in public under any scenario. If it's helpful to make that clear, that change could be made.
Thank you. Yeah, that could be made clear on page 32.
Okay.
If I may continue. With regard to parcel E on the southeast corner here, I'm wondering whether the Heritage Land Bank would have to ensure road access in order to sell parcel E. And if that's the case, I'm wondering whether this should be a phased issue, an issue of phasing. I guess I have the concern that if there were to be a connector road put in where that dashed line crosses the parcel, it could be considered public investment, and that this may not be a high priority for public funding, and then it would also possibly open up more of those steep lands when HLB is really trying to sell land that's close to existing public facilities, and it creates an efficient pattern of development. So I guess that's sort of a two-part question. Would HLB have to ensure road access to sell that parcel? And if so, is this something that should happen later after the other parcels have a chance to hit the market and develop?
I think we're probably all on the same page on this one. These parcels on either side through which access would have to be built as private parcels. And the expectation is that because it's a very small business to develop or offer for sale, even until there was some indication to get access to it. So essentially, I think it says long-term, words to that effect in the plan. This is held for the possible future time when road access and other development occur on adjoining parcels, creates access coming into the area, and at that time it perhaps be practical to develop road access in the area. It also could be sold in advance of that, and this person would be waiting until, I would guess that person would be waiting until access was improved on the other side, and they actually cut a deal with one of the adjoining landowners to provide road access in. So it's private development with roads to be developed by those
Okay, so that would get to my first question. Can it be sold without legal access? Can HLB sell it without legal access?
Right. You have, when it's subdivided, it has to have both legal and physical access.
So like state land sales, we're all familiar with state and sell land parcels, subdivision and physical access. This is big enough that it can be sold as a tract. And this person owning that would have to wait until such time as they found a way to still physical and legal access.
Okay. Well, does it make sense to HLB to agree not to subdivide it and require public involvement in road development until other parcels are underway or development's underway?
It's necessary given the things you just said. If they sell it, if they were to choose to sell it whole prior to subdivision, they could sell it tomorrow if somebody wants to buy it. If they were to subdivide it, they'd be forced to figure out the access to it prior to sale of a small parcel. And so I think it takes care of itself. It's kind of self-regulated.
All right. If I may, another question on access to parcel E. On page, let's see, where is it? Oh, page 39, there's talk of possibly putting a road in parcel E, just, quote, just above the open space corridor. And that got me concerned that if this is the residential access road, it would have to go switchbacking up this parcel, and that would not match the development intent stated on page 3 or 4 of retaining the scenic and natural features from all parts of Eagle River.
This may be an example. I think the whole evening is sort of focused around this question of how much detail is useful here. In retrospect, I may argue that statement doesn't add much to the plan at the level of it's a policy too far, a suggestion too far. I think it's just to remove it. The language in here was to explain to someone who might be interested in possible access to the area that doesn't really have any final formal policy intent other than to say, this looks like the more likely road, it's conversational. Another possibility is there is a road down here would be to come in below and develop a lower portion of the area. Strikes me as trying to explain more than is necessary. I think emphasis to lead the record to the road that raises the question that seems premature to try to speculate on the answer.
Yeah, I would think that would be a good idea, either that or emphasize that would be for lower development, not create a switchback pattern hill.
I don't think anybody had any intent to build a switchback. I think it would be impossible. You would develop from a lower point if you were to use the lower road.
Okay.
Next.
Let's see. I think I heard earlier about clarifying that McDonald Drive extension could cross the Muldrow parcels somewhere. It's stated in here that there won't be a through road, and I think the intention is that it won't be a direct road that invites cut-through traffic. So would the petitioner be, the HLB be amenable to clarifying that?
I'm sorry, Ms. Pease, would you repeat that question? You were talking about the triangle piece?
Yes, well, both pieces. Page 39 says, new access for the Muldrow Street residential parcels will be designed considering the existing, okay, I'll skip down. A through road connecting these two roads, Muldrow Street and Fish Hatchery Road, is not permitted. A through road is not permitted. And it seems to me that the intent is, yes, you do want traffic to go through those parcels, but what I'm hearing is it shouldn't be a direct road that invites cut-through traffic. So I just wondered if HLB would be okay to clarify that.
Yes, Ms. Pease, the intent is to not have a cut-through street and to increase traffic and to allow that to be access into a subdivision that might have cul-de-sac access, or and you might be able to work your way through that parcel, but the intent is not to have a cut-through.
Okay, thank you. If I may continue, this is, I think there's several small technical corrections which probably the consultant could just look at. But I did want to raise, on page, the Figure 4 development suitability map, and let's see, I think that's on 15 or 16. If I am reading these shades of green correctly, most of that north knoll is shaded toward the higher development suitability. I mean, there are 4 colors, and it's the second most suitable. Even more of that parcel is rated suitable, I guess you'd say, than the Carroll Creek, if you go by percentages. And it just seemed to me that if the slopes really do average 30 to 45%, and Table 3 says this is generally unsuitable for development, I'm wondering why it shades up that lighter shaded, shades as with that lighter shaded green.
Seems like a reasonable thing for us to check out and correct.
Okay. Another point is on pages 18 and 18 refers to these Chugach State Park access points, and then page 23 has some unlabeled dots. It's hard to figure out which is which, and it's sort of a labeling issue. I guess that's more of a technical change. I do have one more that's sort of substantive, and that has to do with references to managing the North Knoll according to Chugach State Park's management directives. I didn't find in here any reference to what I believe is the pending Chugach State Park Master Plan revision and Chugach State Park Trails Plan revision, which have been underway for, I think, about 2 years. And they're just references to the outdated 82 or 87 plan. I thought it would be worth referencing those and saying that, if the Chugach Hillside Trail and other trails are proposed in the pending Chugach State Master Plan, the HLB management would accommodate those. Maybe Mr. Phelps can confirm that those plans are well underway.
Yeah, they are. We've actually developed a draft agency review document for the trails.
Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Anything else, Ms. Pease?
I'm just looking to see which I think are technical questions. I guess here's one more. I understand that this is somewhere a degree of detail, more explicit detail than the comp plan. I'm just wondering about the identification of wetlands and the idea that wetlands in the Tract B will be put into the mitigation bank. And I'm wondering whether they've been mapped adequately to say specifically what those are. Right now, what the language on pages 31 and 33 says, it's the intent of HLB to set aside portions of this natural resource corridor in a wetlands mitigation bank. Elsewhere, there have been sort of acreages assigned to what's going to happen next. And is it possible to know how much acreage of wetlands is going to be designated? Just as we have density limits on some of the other parcels, can we sort of have a wetlands description of what would be mitigation bank wetlands?
Through the chair, no, we haven't done the technical research to know exactly what the parameters of that potential mitigation bank parcel would be. It's just what we'd like to do with the parcel, and we think it's feasible.
Okay.
Okay. Does that conclude your questions?
Well, Madam Chair, before I declare my questions concluded, I don't know whether we would take action on it tonight, because I have a few what I think are, minor technical changes, and if we need to go through all of them, then I will.
Well, I think we have, I know Mr. Weddleton has a list of things that he had submitted, and were all your technical changes in the list you submitted to staff?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, there's just one missing, so maybe I better raise that verbally.
Maybe you better raise that, because if they're in the written materials, we can just refer to the lists.
Okay. The one I wanted to refer to verbally is probably more policy than technical anyway. On page 40, at the request of one of the municipal agencies, there's been a bulleted development policy to, it's the, third bullet from the top, work jointly with municipal agencies, the local road service area, and future developers to pay for construction, maintenance, and upgrade of the roads. And I had the concern that this might in some way compel the municipality through, I think the comp plan specifies, Eagle River comp plan specifies municipal partnering with approach roads and that sort of thing. And again, this goes back to Parcel E. If the municipality has to work with future developers to pay for a road for 5 houses, and it might necessitate upgrades to Brandywine and upgrades to Savage Drive, I'm a little nervous about that.
Okay.
And wondered if that compels municipal funding for roads that will serve 5 houses up there on Parcel E.
Yeah, implied here, but perhaps needed to be added is, sort of consistent with municipal policy as appropriate. There are times when it's appropriate for the municipality to partner with a private developer, and other times when that's not appropriate. We could explain and clarify that, or we could drop it. I think it was just making the point specifically with regards to the access up to
the sports center, that's likely to be done properly by the group. In other instances, just one of the people on that list who are appropriate to develop. So, I don't know if that's something that needs to be clarified.
I don't think any would mind doing that. I think the intent isn't something that's debated.
Okay, I understand the collaboration potential for McDonald Drive, but I think it would be helpful to clarify that it wouldn't necessarily apply to the remote parcels like E.
Thank you, Ms. Pease. Mr. Weddleton, I see you back in my queue.
Well, are we going through our list then, or?
Well, not if your items were submitted in writing, and we can just refer to that list when we, of things that we want to have addressed, unless there are issues on your list you need answers to questions.
So if we refer to this, would it, some are pretty simple changes, edits and so on, would we get an issue response and look at that, or they just take my suggestions and go with it?
I don't know what anyone else's thinking is, but I suspect some of these we may be satisfied with the responses that we've received around the table, but there might be others that some people feel, I don't know, what's the will of the body? I mean, do the commissioners feel like we may need an issue response? I need guidance on how to direct Mr. Weddleton.
Well, Madam Chair, I guess I've gotten, I think, a good response to some of these, which I dropped my concern. In some cases, I've asked HLB and the consultant if they would make changes. Those changes are not necessarily wordsmithed yet, so I guess I'd like to see perhaps a list of proposed changes based on our discussion here tonight, as succinctly worded or as quickly prepared as possible. I hate to add another review, but we might have 15 or 20
Right.
changes.
I wasn't expecting that we're going to have this be the final time we look at it. I think based on what action we take, we're going to need to see a revised, something, a revision of something in the future. Well, I certainly don't want to cut anyone short, and I know that Mr. Phelps needs to leave at 10 this evening, so I'm going to ask him specifically do you have any issues that you'd like to raise, Mr. Phelps?
Well, it's kind of like an overarching issue is the problem. What I think needs to happen here is the primary purpose of this document is to provide the land classifications and management intent for the Eagle River plan. That's my understanding of the situation. It's very similar to Mr. Eishen's concern as well, too. And so a lot of what we have in here is meant to provide guidance to subsequent decision making. Not very little of which is going to relate to zoning and platting, by the way. There was an argument that was going to be basically forcing or providing influence to zoning and platting. Very little of this will actually be found in zoning and platting. There doesn't need to be a lot of guidance given to the zoning process. In fact, there's actually a concern that I have of identifying what the recommended zoning is now, when the concern here is to identify essentially the land use classifications. There is a subsequent process you have to go through to figure it out, and that process deals with the peculiarities of the time, and it may not be the same as what we're dealing with right now. So I have a different type of concern, which is I'm not sure that this is doing what I think it needs to do in terms of revision of the comprehensive plan. Different problem.
Okay. Okay. Do you anticipate that you'll have any written suggestions to submit? No. Okay.
I may have written suggestions, yes.
To submit to staff?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton, I'm going to suggest then that if you have issues you'd like to raise now, please go ahead and do so.
Well, let me ask both the staff and Chris, have you had a chance to glance at my questions?
Only in the last hours I've had moments here. I've gone through and made notes on each of these. My sense is that most of them are either clarification or explanation. There may be a small subset where there's a point of disagreement, but you have a question, for example, about on page 31, who manages if it's not Parkland, what process makes it Parkland? And I think I can give some answers to those. Some questions about how to make the decision on a signal. Those are things I think in my explanation category. A couple is like, is it rural or urban standards that's going to be applied on page 7? That's a traffic department call. A decision has to be clarified in that. So if we were in a different context, I suspect we would sit here and spend a half an hour going through your points, and on 85% of them, we would reach mutual agreement that would either be a clarification consistent with the intent of the plan or an explanation that would satisfy your question. I can't predetermine where's the other 10 or 15% where something more substantive might have to be worked on, and I leave it to you and the group to decide when and if that half an hour discussion should take place.
Well, that sounds like an issue response in the making.
Okay.
Right. So you're more familiar with my comments than probably anyone in the city.
Yeah.
The way they go.
Well, and that's...
can you take these and, based on what we've said today, and then comments from like this?
Well, and our staff will also be working with them also, along with the consultant.
Yeah, I believe that there's pretty quick answers to most of those questions that I don't think we'd have any problem answering. The overarching issue that Commissioner Phelps raised is one that I think is going to continue to be sort of a stickler with the body, and I guess I would like to assure you that we had the same issue when we reviewed the plan initially, and I think we've come to a level of comfort that allows us to move forward and at least in our minds have an idea of what this plan does and how it's applied. I don't feel like we've succeeded in explaining it thoroughly. So perhaps a stab at doing that in writing and having individual conversations with folks that might need that would be better served. But that is going to be, I think, the harder issue moving forward.
Okay. Ms. Pease, you have something else?
No. I'll withdraw my request.
You withdrew your request. Okay. My queue is empty. Well, no one has any more. Oh, Mr. Weddle.
No, so what do we do? Do we make a motion that they take?
I close the hearing is the first thing I do. The hearing is closed. Now, we have a motion, and I'm looking down in my little box.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I think it would be appropriate if we go into a committee of the whole. So I move that we go into committee of the whole to discuss this thing. That way we're a little less formal.
That would be fine. I'm looking for a second in the little box.
On the board.
Nope. Oh, no option.
Nobody pushed the button to second Mr. Isham's motion.
We don't have the option. It's not live on our screens. Somebody must have.
I'll second it.
Thank you. Does anybody object going into the committee of the whole? No. All right. So now we're in the committee of the whole. Who would like to start the discussion? Mr. Isham? Mr. Weddleton? Ms. Pease? Mr. Frederick?
I tapped it.
Okay.
I think it would be worth having the consultant and staff look at the numerous comments we made tonight, many of which we sort of got a verbal consensus on, and coming back with a list of proposed revisions that incorporate our discussion here tonight, including our recommended decision whether or not to put in the zoning recommendations that are currently on page, at the end of the plan. 43. There are text changes, there are some technical changes, single words or clarifications on tables, but I think we covered enough ground that it would be worth looking at the revised changes before we vote on it.
Okay. Ms. Yoshimura.
Well, I guess what I want to say is there's a lot of detail in this plan, which, as I'm beginning to learn, is really supposed to be generic in as far as zoning categories and that sort of thing, or land use categories. And so I'm confused because there are parts of this plan that I don't agree with without having further information. Specifically, two areas that I think are extremely important. One is a traffic impact analysis. I would like to know what the impact of these potential units are going to be on the surrounding neighborhoods and how they're going to flow into the Old Glen Highway, which is already congested. And if, and I don't think you can do these comprehensive plans, as I've stated before, without having a traffic impact analysis accompany them. And then the second one is, I think Ms. Pease brought up a very good point regarding Section E, regarding the wetlands delineation. And in my opinion, I don't think we can have good comprehensive plans without those two pieces of information. I mean, if we're going to have photographs of houses and get into the detail of what the houses are going to look like, then I think we have to take a step back and say we need a TIA and we need wetlands delineation for these types of plans. That's my comment.
Okay, Mr. Weddleton.
Well, let me skip that for now. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Isham.
I sort of have a little different approach than Ms. Yoshimura does. I feel as though this thing is too detailed, and I think it needs to be a little more broad, because when you start, I would agree that it says before you do anything you got to have a TIA, but then I really question whether you need to say, well, it's got to be R7 and it's got to be R2 MSL and this kind of stuff. A lot of that would, in my mind, would come out when you get into the more detailed planning, when you go and ask for the zoning, when you go and do the subdivision and the platting board gets involved. So I think it's good to define in general terms what you want, but I don't think that the comprehensive plan needs to describe what kind of zoning, as an example. So I'm just saying it's too detailed.
Okay. Mr. Phelps.
Yeah, I guess, I'm similarly troubled. My understanding is that the reason that this is being done is because there's a code section that says if parcels are not identified in the comprehensive plan, before the Heritage Land Bank can do something, they have to have a site analysis, and presumably the purpose of the site analysis is to determine what the proper and effective use of the property is. That is, to assign a designation to those parcels that are comparable to the designations of some type using the comprehensive plan. So what I would be expecting is what are the requirements that would be typical in the plan for that area for these parcels. And so that's what I'm looking to find. I'm looking to find that specific recommendation so that I know that we have fulfilled the requirements of code. And that's what I'm unclear about, is whether or not this is fulfilling the requirements of code. If it is, I haven't quite seen it yet. If it isn't, then we have a problem. I guess I also have a problem with stating that these recommendations, if you notice throughout here, will say will be followed. And I can tell you that they are not going to be followed necessarily. You go through all these planning processes, and the planning processes will determine that not right, it's going to be done a different way for whatever reason, and you're creating an inconsistency for yourself or a problem for yourself with providing such degree of specification at this time without all the detail. Now, what I'm arguing about is actually the word will as opposed to should or may. I think that you want to have discretionary language here because they've gone through a lot of work to say that this is what the community wants. There are certain ways of managing and developing this area, and that's fine, and that should be considered as part of the subsequent planning process. But to say that the subsequent planning processes are going to be bound by this, by will statements, is probably going a bit too far. So I'm having a problem conceptually with this, and I'm not sure we're answering the basic questions of what we have to do, what they have to do in code.
Okay, I have Mr. Robinson in the queue.
I guess I'd just put another thought out there, and that is that if you're a member of the community on adjacent properties and you sat through 4 different public meetings, and during those public meetings truly specific scenarios were discussed, and a level of expectation was raised that there would be a certain type of development in your neighborhood, you then have that expectation, and I think that's the sort of box that we're in right now. Is I would love to move forward and say simply let's come up with some land use classifications that update the comp plan. However, to not address these other issues, I think risks really damaging the expectation that citizens have been led to believe, and so that's I think understand what we're trying to express is we have a constraint here. We understand that the process is more complicated than maybe it could have been, but we're not willing to backtrack completely on that. And so, in fact, there is a level of certainty But we want to make sure it happens through this process as these other processes happen, because to do otherwise, we think would do damage to the municipality and the Heritage Land Bank and others. So we appreciate where your frustration are. I'd just like you to understand this other complexity of what we have in front of us. With that, I would say, we're very prepared to answer, do an issue response to the issues that you've posed, to the additional comments that we have, lay that out and bring that back to you with recommendations and have your recommendations be moved from there. And we're willing to suggest a time when that may happen.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Pease.
I would hope that maybe in responding to this concern, the consultant and staff could answer the question, are we allowed to adopt greater specificity in a site-specific land use study? We have minimums that we have to cover, but is it within our discretion to adopt additional details? And I would sort of echo what Mr. Robinson said. I think the public wants a fairly complete vision. That gives them the assurance to go with higher density, for example, or to go with some development on Parcel E. At the parcel level, as a commission, we shy away from speculative rezones. We want to know. We often, put conditions on a rezone, as we did recently with the rezone from R1A to R4 on O'Malley Road. We put on height requirements. I think, the public, in making that first step toward a zoning, and this is the big step toward a zoning, might even include recommendations for zoning, the public wants a comprehensive vision. So I'm comfortable with having detail. I mean, this almost, because there's just a small parcel of neighborhood in between, it almost becomes kind of a neighborhood plan. It's so hard to get that kind of planning funded and underway. I wonder if this isn't a service to this discrete, fairly well-bounded community to have this detail in here. And if it is within our authority to consider greater detail rather than the minimum, I think the public probably wants that.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Ms. Yoshimura.
Well, I appreciate what Mr. Robinson said. I think the community does want greater detail. But I also don't want to disappoint the community by leading them down a path that gives them this greater detail, when in reality, it can't happen the way it's been described in this plan. Cul-de-sacs have a 600-foot length. You can't have, if you're going to have 111 or 110 units with one egress, that won't happen. At some point in time, then, the community is going to be very disappointed because it's not going to get what we endorsed when it gets to the specific regulations. In terms of what the driveway length is going to be, what the road right-of-way has to be. And so that's my frustration. I agree with Mr. Isham. You either have to have a lot of detail, and it has to be the right detail, and it has to conform with Title 21, or it has to be generic. But right now, we're trying to have it both ways, and it just won't happen. And the people that will lose out on that is the community, ultimately, because we won't be able to deliver what we promised and endorsed.
Thank you. Mr. Isham. And then Mr. Phelps. Did I see you in the queue? Okay.
Yeah. It seems to me that if you look at this chart on 43, that expectations will not be crushed if you use the land use classification column and just don't put in the recommended zoning. I mean, if they know that it's going to be 1 to 2 dwelling units per acre, 7 to 10, or 11 to 15, whatever type of zoning fits for that area, then that's what it should probably be be zoned for eventually. But right now, I think we just want to say that, hey, that this is going to be low density, medium density, or a little more medium density, you know. And then I just think we're boxing ourselves in if we say that it must be this and we put it in the plan.
Okay. Mr. Phelps.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, I suppose, that there are all sorts of processes that one's going to have to go through to develop these areas. It's going to be platting. It's going to be working with a water utility. It's going to be working with the fire department. And the answers you think exist right now may, in fact, not be the answers that come out the other side. It's because of the practical reality of the situation and because of the nature of the code. Let's go to this issue of expectations. First of all, there's a question in my mind if you should have, as a staff, created those expectations prior to going to the Planning Commission and to the Assembly. Because the policy is actually created by the Commission and by the Assembly. It's not by staff. And so it's not really the function of staff to create expectations, in my opinion. It is the function of staff to capture what the community wants in that area and to communicate it to the Commission and to the Assembly, and to describe what they intend to have in that area in a document. And so my frustration, as you can tell, is with there is specificity in here that I know is not going to work, like the recommendation for the land exchange. We're not going to do that. I can tell you that right now, okay? That's just one example that I'm familiar with, okay? And so that leads into, if you take that recommendation and you expect DNR to do a land exchange, I don't think that's going to happen. And that's just an example of just one thing in here. Now, but I'm not trying to say there's not a lot of good work here. There is. It's just I think it has to be packaged differently. I think the essential aspects are what do you have to do to meet the requirements of the Heritage Land Bank, A. Then B, what are the requirements of the comprehensive plan? What do we have to have in there from this document that would be necessary as we normally think of a comprehensive plan for a specific area? Those are two things that are very specific. Now, if you want to adopt recommendations that are specific, you probably can, but you don't want to say they shall be followed because they're not going to be or cannot be. You can say they should be followed and provide guidance. And so I have a basic philosophical difference with the approach that's used here. It's just my perspective, I suppose. But it does represent a certain amount of practicality in terms of how plans are actually developed.
Mr. Robinson.
I know we're all enjoying this conversation. I enjoy a lively debate as well. Let me give it another shot. We, as staff, were a plan reviewer on this, and I just want to clarify that for the record. We did not do the public outreach. We are acting on as agents and advisors to the Planning and Zoning Commission of what we think has happened here, which is that a plan has been commissioned by the Heritage Land Bank to come up with land use classifications plus. And the plus is things that will be adopted if you so recommend as official municipal policy. Those policies can contain with them clear direction on what happens on subsequent processes, be it disposals on purchase and sale agreements that the Heritage Land Bank willingly agrees to do because they have signed off on this plan, on the fact that there are special limitations that are general, but that are proposed that can be made more specific when a rezone comes back before this body. So you would then be making the call of whether a rezone application was consistent with the standards that are proposed and at some point conceivably adopted as policy. So again, I actually object to the notion that I've heard here that we can't guarantee certain things. I think where we're getting into trouble is we're trying to make real sure that we get certain things out of this planning process, more so than we normally do. We would have not normally gone down this road. Now that we're down this road, we're going to try to get it, and we're going to try to be real specific on how we're going to get it. And to not do that would, I suppose, be a recommendation that we adopt the land use classifications without some of this other stuff. That's fine. The question then becomes, is this other stuff used for anything else, and if so, how? That's sort of the question that we would want to be clear on, because at some point there are additional steps that happen here. So, again, I completely recognize why you all are a little bit confused and frustrated. At the same time, I think there's a way out of this that makes everybody happy, the Heritage Land Bank, the community, the planning department, and I think the reviewing bodies that would then have some direction from which to review moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Ms. Pease.
And the way out is?
Mr. Robinson.
I mean, the way out is we take care of the basic questions that are clarification questions, and I don't disagree with Commissioner Phelps at saying that there are certain contingencies if they have to do with land trades that are outside of the parcels that are here. I think there's certain things that are clearly overreaching the bounds of this plan. That said, I think development standards that could happen within these parcels is at this point there's a way to deal with it. But we have to, I guess, come to a common understanding with how we deal with that, however unconventional that may be, and however, it isn't what we've done in the past, but we've reviewed it, the planning director has reviewed it, zoning and plotting has reviewed the plan. We've kind of come to an understanding of how it can be applied. The first step is to convince you all that there's a way to do that. The second step would be to convince the Assembly of that, and that the constraints, in fact, put on the Heritage Land Bank, because that's, in fact, what we would be doing, are worthwhile as community benefits. So I guess, Commissioner Pease, to answer your question, I think the way is we just try to come to a common understanding, whether that's through a lot more discussion, whether that's through having a few more people weigh in on it. I don't know. We've had a lot more time than you have to kind of get there. And I guess that's all I'm asking is we'll work with you to try to get there and try to find what points may be reasonable, and maybe there's some that aren't, and maybe there's some things having to do with road connections and things like that if we can admittedly describe how that would play out, what things will happen and which things may or would be suggested to happen. One of the things that we may decide will happen would be a site plan review for some of the parcels, and that'd be a clear special limitation. We got to make that connection, though. I mean, what's the connection other than through this plan document? So I think you all have heard enough from me, but I just want to really emphasize we were exactly where you were, and we've tried to sort of come up with something that we're comfortable with. We're pretty sure we are. We're pretty sure that the Heritage Land Bank is. So let's kind of work together so that we can maybe come up with some compromise on that.
Okay, thank you. My queue is empty. Are we ready to come out of the Committee of the Whole? I think so. A motion would be nice.
So moved. Okay.
And Ms. Pease beat you, so you would like to second it. Thank you. Is there any objection to coming out of the Committee of the Whole? I don't hear any. We are now back in our formal meeting mode. And the matter of the site-specific land use study for Chugach-Eagle River is before us. The public hearing has been closed. So what is the wish of the Commission? Ms. Pease, thank you for making a motion.
Madam Chair, on the matter of case 2008-139, I suggest that we ask staff to take our comments, written comments and our verbal discussion here tonight, and respond to us with sort of three-part response. One would be to take care of the basic clarifications and revisions to text that we discussed. Second would be to figure out if there are any clearly overreaching promises that simply couldn't be guaranteed, in which case the public might be misled if we didn't drop them. And the third part would be to explain the development standards a little bit further, sorting out the maybes from those that could clearly be implemented, and then return to that response to us for our consideration.
And Mr. Isham seconded the motion. Do you wish to discuss your motion, Ms. Pease?
Yes. We, tonight, I think, got a lot more clarification, but there's sort of the overarching question of the level of specificity that we are allowed or enjoined to adopt here. We know that we need to meet certain basic requirements for land use classifications for the Heritage Land Bank. This plan, to achieve community consensus on those land use classifications, discussed with the community and agencies quite a bit of detail. And we, I think, believe that the community was interested and wanted some of that detail. Yet there is the question of whether it is implementable, and several commissioners are concerned that the plan might promise things that it cannot deliver, which would be a disservice to the community. So we need to get some clarity on whether the detail, which was carefully worked out in good faith with the community, can actually be, we need some confidence in how that can be implemented, and if parts of it can't be, then we want that clarified.
Thank you. Mr. Phelps.
Well, the question I had is that if I were to supply written comments, would those be responded to in addition to the direction that is occurring now?
Mr. Robinson?
We would really welcome that, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Weddleton?
Well, I'm not sure on the list of things to look at specifically. Did you have a traffic impact analysis, or maybe not a full-blown traffic impact analysis, but maybe just a double checking to see if it's in the realms of possibility?
Okay.
There's been this discussion with this traffic impact analysis throughout the evening. Let me try and clarify this. This goes a long ways back, but I think it's still relevant. The traffic impact analysis is designed for site-specific analysis for a project. That's the way the models they use are structured. When you're dealing with a large area like this, you don't use TIA. What you actually do is you go back to the long-range transportation plan for the area, which is Chugach Eagle River, and they actually have a transportation model for that. You stick the stuff into their trip generation equations and what have you. Then they can find out if there's a problem associated with this. I got to believe that they actually put in the right land use information to the models and have generated the information and have concluded that the impacts are acceptable. And I suppose if we were to ask them that question of, have you done the analysis of these areas as part of the transportation plan, and have you found that the impacts are acceptable, they could probably answer that. But it's the context of a regional model as opposed to a TIA.
And that is a question that can be asked.
Yeah, you can ask it.
Yes. So consider it asked, Mr. Robinson.
Consider that understood, and I appreciate the clarification.
Okay. I don't have anyone else in the queue. Mr. Weddleton, did you have something else to add?
No, as far as the traffic analysis, I think that's what I was looking for, is something that wasn't the full-blown, I don't know the term, so it's something, make sure we're within the realm of possibility.
Okay. No one else is in the queue. Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, this is returned for further work. Thank you. And thank everyone for their patience. Commissioners, please don't get in a hurry. And everybody save your plans, by the way. We will be needing them. And I have a couple of other little items of business before we dismiss. And Mr. Robinson, I hope you can stick around for a couple of minutes. One of the things I want to remind commissioners about is our annual APOC filing is due March 15th. So if anyone hasn't filed it yet, I know some of you are getting ready to go on vacations, and you need to get them into the clerk's office before March 15th. They were sent to us this year electronically. We didn't receive a hard copy like we usually do. If anyone needs it again, let me know, and I would, or you can and I can forward you the one I received, or you can get one from the municipal clerk's office again. The second thing is on March 9th, and I have to get Mr. Robinson's attention. So while Mr. Robinson's talking to Mr. Phelps, I will just take care of this other little piece of business. I am on the AMATS Air Quality Advisory Committee. I am its chair, matter of fact. And at our meeting on Monday, imagine my surprise when one of the items on the agenda had to do with the AMATS roadway project evaluation criteria and transportation enhancement project evaluation criteria, and I was a little surprised because we hadn't seen it. And of course, we're the Citizens Advisory Committee to AMAT, so I've invited Mr. Lyon or the appropriate AMAT staff person to have it available for us to review before, in a timely fashion, so our comments can get to the policy committee in time. I've got a couple of handfuls of stuff, and if you could help me and take one half down to that end of the table. The first two documents, the ones that are dated February 23rd on the bottom, are the two documents I received at the air quality meeting. The rest of these documents are documents I have downloaded from the AMATS website and printed off for everyone. And this is from the, and this has to do with this, everything, with the process that's going on now. And the last document is the AMAT general policies and requirements. Oh, here's the top two, sorry. And the reason I printed that out is in policy 1, F and I, and in policy 4, D, little b, little Romanet 2 and 3, it talks about the role of the Planning Commission. This is news to me. Apparently, I'm supposed to appoint someone from the Planning Commission to participate in the group that does this review. And, well, we've never been invited. I've never been invited, and I've been chair for 3 years now, to appoint anybody. So I'm appointing us all this year to go through it. And if one of us needs to carry the bucket of water to the policy committee, actually, I will probably, whatever our recommendation is, go to the policy committee and share it with them. But I just thought you'd like to know this. And just for your information, on February 12th, the policy committee approved the new TIP, and they also approved the new public participation plan. And that document, these policies and procedures that I'm passing out, they have been adopted and are part of the public participation plan, and they're one of the documents in Appendix B. So that's all the AMATS trivia that I have for you this evening. That's all I have. Mr. Robinson, we need to talk about the design standard schedule. On March 9th, we barely have a quorum. If anybody else turns out that they can't make it, we won't have a quorum. And we had discussed, now we've had some agenda items, things moved to that agenda, and we had discussed the possibility, if we had time on that night, of having a work session on the design standards. What did you decide?
Well, we hadn't fully decided because we weren't sure if there was a quorum or what the will was to move through. And I think for those of you that weren't at the Thursday meeting, I think this was where we had this conversation, and there was some concern that Mr. Frederick was not going to be at the 9th meeting, and I think some recognition that he's an important participant in these conversations. So we kind of laid out a couple of options. One was that with Mr. Frederick and the body's okay, we convene with separate meetings with Commissioner Frederick and Commissioner Yoshimura prior to that date and kind of think through some of those comments and then continue with the actual deliberations that night. Were you nodding that you were available March 9th, Connie?
Yes, she is. She's back from her vacation.
Okay. Welcome back. The other alternative is we actually do have a work session scheduled with you all at 5:30 p.m. on March 9th. So
our calendar says it's canceled.
The one that's canceled should be on the 2nd, not on the 9th.
Oh, on the 2nd. Yes, I see. And that's for Title 21 multifamily and commercial design. That work session.
Well, I don't have the schedule in front of me. The intent was at least this. But typically, the way I think we'd like to do this is to have work sessions on the first Monday of the month, and then have the deliberations on Title 21 the second. Generally that meeting is reserved for Title 21. We couldn't do that in March because the Spanad Road had taken up the work session on the 2nd. They've now canceled it, and we're not ready to have a work session on the 2nd. So we could, I think Matt is, we're willing to move forward and deliberate along with having a work session on the 9th if you all would like to do that. An alternative would be to still have the work session on the 9th, to commit to the second meeting in April, actually tackling two-family townhouse and some additional getting as far as we can, and also likely scheduling another special meeting in April to make up, basically what we would have lost in March.
For the residential, the rest of the residential.
Correct.
Okay.
Because not just Mr. Fredericks, but other members will be
on vacation.
Also.
Right.
And I think this is so important for the community that we get it right. I would recommend that we address these issues in April, when we're more likely to have a full board.
Right. On the night of the 13th, I may need to leave by 11, but that shouldn't be a problem. There should be enough people here to deal with it. I'm going to my grandson's wedding in Las Vegas. Yes.
No, I agree with that, and I'll certainly be rested enough to work extra hard
And
in
you
April.
could work extra hard that night.
Yeah.
For that last hour, you could pull my oar, too.
Yeah.
In case Mr. Isham can.
So could I maybe get at least a tentative commitment, knowing that it takes a long time to deliberate and get work back to you that you've requested? Could we tentatively say that there would be a second meeting also reserved in April? And again, my concern is just that we fall too far behind on this. And
yes.
As you mentioned, we continue to stack some cases on these nights too, so we keep pushing it back. I know it's not the most fun process, but
we can have an extra meeting in April.
Okay. Would you still like us to hold a March 9th work session, just for those of you that are around, to become more familiar with the code?
Yes, and because it'll save us time in the meeting.
Okay.
I think everyone should have the information, and there's going to be so many people gone. I think
That's a concern that you think we should or shouldn't.
we shouldn't, because there are going to be so many people gone.
Okay.
Well, and I guess I would just say that, on our Thursday meetings, not usually everybody's, it's very difficult to get all of you there. We could try to figure out how to do a work session and then try to, offer independent times for folks to sit down with us too.
If we get our material enough ahead of time, then we won't need to have a work session.
Is the second too early?
Second's going to be too early, just because we weren't planning on it, so.
Right.
And selfishly, we like having these work sessions because it does actually force us to get you the material. So I need that little chip for the rest of the staff to make sure we've got it to you. So, that said, if the work session is nothing more than a brief introduction, a time for questions for those of you that care to come, and a delivery of materials, I think that would be helpful.
Well, you seem to already have a work session scheduled for the 6th of April.
Yeah, that's what I'm. From here on out, we know we need more than just the actual meeting time to, I think, have some of this informal conversation and question and answer. And it's preferable to do it, a week before the meeting, not the night of the meeting, too.
That are here next week. Well, Earnhardt won't be here. Okay.
Jim, are you saying that because we don't need the March date? Is that where you were going with that?
I'm sorry, I'm talking to the secretary and not being a good chair right this minute. Ms. Pease?
Yeah, Chair, I wanted to follow up with Mr. Robinson. He said you like to have the work sessions because that forces you to get the material out there. I find that what makes a work session really productive is to get the material ahead of time so that I've read through it. Like with this Eagle River Chugiak one, we just got the document on the table, so all these 20 questions that I had and Mr. Weddleton had weren't able to we couldn't voice them.
No, I understand. And I really have no idea why you did not have, just so you know, my personal frustration is, even if the staff report is not done until Thursday, the plan's been done for 4 months. So, there's no reason why you should not have had the plan even without what amounts to a mini little intro to the plan. But we understand that it's always preferable to get it to you, at least several days before the work session.
So likewise with these work sessions that are coming up on Title 21, if we can have the draft 3 days before, we can participate and knock off a lot of questions that then won't have to be discussed at the, deliberation. I think that's the way it's most efficient. So you said you like the work sessions because it forces you to get the material out, and I'm just clarifying that if you can get the material out a few days before the work session, that really helps me.
No, that is our intent to do that. I misspoke there.
Okay. Ms. Yoshimura. Mr. Weddleton.
So I'm not clear what's happening on March 9th. Did you cancel it because I'll be gone?
No, we're having a meeting. Not on Title 21. Oh, we wouldn't meet on Title 21 when you're gone, John?
The question is, would you like us to still hold a work session at 5:30 p.m. on March 9th on Title 21, as well as on April 6th, prior to the second meeting in April?
Well, definitely the April 6th. What do you think? I think probably on the March 9th. I don't know that there'll be enough people that would show up. At the most, there are going to be 5 of us. And at 5:30, I don't know if there would be, what do you think, ladies?
No, I think it's not probably efficient. It's a month ahead, too.
Yeah.
And if you're going to give the same work session on the 6th, I don't think that's efficient use of your time.
No, I don't either.
And I respect that. I would just, our intent was, by the April 6th one, we've been hinting at having some additional proposals related to site condos and an additional review process for site condos. That request or that idea has not come out of just us. We've heard it from several people. And we know we will have had time to craft that for the April meeting. There's no shortage of material to do. We don't need to do a March meeting. I think I wonder, what I've heard is you guys do not like when we just present to you and don't leave time for questions, and there's so much content on that we're just going to have to be forced to get it to you ahead of time, give you a real brief overview, and leave the time for questions. But I think we sometimes feel like we don't have time to revisit what the issues are, and that's my only reluctance to sort of cut it short. But here's my deal. We'll do our best on April 6th to have the material in enough time ahead to structure a conversation that is, leaves plenty of time for questions and answers, and then we'll welcome during the next week, whether it's individual conversations or emails or whatever, that dialogue back and forth prior to the meeting.
Okay, I have a question. It's on our calendar for March 9th. It says we're hearing Title 21, Chapter 7, Section 3, but it also has that for April 13th.
Section 3 we started dealing with at the last meeting. Section 3 is essentially all of the residential and commercial standards remaining in Chapter 7. That's what I mean is it's not a one-meeting deal. That's why we're trying to talk about scheduling enough time to get through the entire thing. I mean, we got through some of single family. Essentially, we got some recommendations of what to do with single family. We still have two-family, townhouse, multifamily, commercial, and we're adding site condo.
Right, but we don't want to have it any of that on March 9th. I'd rather have a special meeting in April.
Well, here's what I believe is happening. Is at least my proposal is we are, essentially postponing the March 9th. The second meeting of every month is generally reserved for Title 21.
Right.
We have other items on the March 9th.
So you're not going to do Title 21 on that?
Well, that's what I'm hearing from you all, that you would like to postpone it. What I would like to see in April is a work session on April 6th that we will bring to you prior to your meeting that Monday night.
Right.
The normal Title 21 meeting on April 13th. Right. And an additional special meeting later in the month. That's what I'm proposing, because I know we got at least that much, and I don't even think that's going to get us through it. But
well, if we end up having two special meetings, then that's what we'll do.
I just mean it's a lot of material, so that's what and we keep my colleagues keep booking other cases on our Title 21 night, so that's for me to work out with them.
No one wants to get done with it any faster than we do, and we want to get done with it before summer.
Well, I'd like to get done with it before half my staff quits in frustration, so that's not a reflection on you. That's just, if any of you have ever worked on 5-year projects, I think you'll understand.
Some of us have been working on this for 5 years. And we're volunteers.
I know. Well, so we'll take the month off in March. Cheers.
That's what I want to recap. Is March 2nd totally canceled? And what about March 9th?
Well, just a minute. The meeting of March 2nd isn't canceled, just the work session.
Okay, so we're still going to look at the site plan for Spenard Road. Yes. Not going to have the work session on it.
Right.
I think the thought there was because that was about the only thing on the agenda, they wouldn't have additional time. Well,
we have a case that's been moved to that night.
Right.
One of them we postponed.
So we do have a meeting on March 2nd. What about March 9th?
We have a meeting on March 9th.
Okay.
And just to clarify, the other thing we have on March 9th that may not show on your agenda is the Girdwood reconsideration.
Yes.
So you have to postpone that at your March 2nd meeting to March 9th, and you'll be taking it up March 9th.
And then we postponed a case tonight to March 9th.
Right.
And that's the DHA, well, we've got a case on March 9th. And
the UMed plan amendment.
Right, the UMed plan amendment.
Okay, so no work session March 9th, but be here at 6:30 for the other part of the business. Okay.
Yes. So we're lucky. We only have 2 meetings now. We may have a tentative meeting on March 16th.
I'll be gone.
Well, I don't know. It wouldn't be Title 21.
And if it's not Title 21, it's likely you wouldn't need that meeting. But
no, yes.
I think one thing on canceling the Spenard Road work session, some people involved with that may. Are you going to send out an announcement on the cases online or something about that? Or
I do. It's not my case. The work session wasn't a planning department work session, so I'm not sure why it was canceled, frankly, but, I can find out.
I don't think it's bad. I just know there were some people who expected it to happen and would likely be here, and if they walk in and it's empty, that's not a good thing.
I'll pass along that folks may want to be here early in case there are questions. I guess part of the other reason is I believe they've now bifurcated that project to only be dealing with the less controversial portion of the project down the hill. So I think the thought is that since it's not dealing with the entire and I will find out, but I believe that's now why it's not thought of as requiring as much time.
Okay. I think I've now dealt with all my administrative business. Have you dealt with all your administrative business? Oh, Mr. Robinson?
Yes, I have. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone have any comments?
Question, you handed out, passed out to us, the stack of AMATs, scoring criteria and so forth. When will we need to read this, and what's the format for discussing it?
I'll try to find out before Monday. I will contact Mr. Lyon. I've sent emails to him and Lance Wilbur and Jerry Weaver, who's sitting in as acting director in Tom Nelson's absence. And I will call him tomorrow and find out. Also, I wanted to let you know that Mr. Earnhardt will be out all the month of March. He's ill, he's in the hospital, he's not having visitors. I've talked with his wife and his mother, and it'll be a while before he's back with us. But I thought I'd pick up a card this weekend and bring it Monday so everybody could sign the card and we could, I could get it mailed off to him. And there was something else I was going to tell everybody, and it just got lost. I'm having a senior moment. Oh, darn. Anyway, let's see if I run back across my reader board here.
AMAT?
So, AMATs. Well, AMATs, I can't talk about AMATs anymore because I'm fussy.
Jog your memory.
Yeah, I'm fussy about AMATs. Oh, yes, I am going to talk to Mr. Lyon, and I'm going to find out when this is going to be back before us. And I don't know what he might send us. I'm just telling you, this is what's posted out there on the website, and I will email you the link, so if you want to submit any comments on your own, you certainly can. I'm a little disappointed in how the public process appears to be working, and I think that the public participation plan maybe hasn't been launched yet. I guess that's, excuse me? Well, it's just been adopted, so I guess it's just not been launched yet. Anyway, good work tonight, you folks. Oh, now I know what it was. On next week's agenda, there's also, it's time for election of chair and vice chair again. And I'll just let you know, if you think you could put up with me for another year, I would be delighted to continue. I've checked in with Mr. Isham. And Mr. Isham, I don't know what your thoughts are, but you think, and I don't know. Well, if I should be elected, would you be interested in continuing as the sidekick? Deputy dog. Okay, well, that'll be under special orders of business on Monday. Anyway, a motion to adjourn would be in order. Is there any objection? Hearing none,